We're good. Great. Well, good evening, everyone. Commissioner Edge, Commissioner Fuenmayor, can you hear me? Just wanted to check in. Great. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukee Planning Commission. Agendas and additional copies of staff reports are available on the city website at www.milwaukeeoregon.gov. You may locate them by navigating to the community calendar where tonight's meeting page is posted. If you've not reviewed the agenda, please do so. It contains important information about the process. Our first order of business is our native lands acknowledgement. The city of Milwaukee respectfully acknowledges that our community is located on the ancestral homeland of the Clackamas people. In 1855, the surviving members of the Clackamas signed the Willamette Valley Treaty, also known as the Kalapuya Treaty, with the federal government in good faith. We offer our respect and our gratitude for the indigenous people of this land. I'll send it out after the meeting, but there was a really great article in OPB recently about some of the development work that's happening down at Willamette Falls. Both the Grand Ronde tribes and other tribes are doing development projects on both sides. And I thought it was a really interesting, pretty comprehensive look at what's happening and what is really going to be such a transformational project. I'll pass that out for anyone who might be interested. Any viewers out there would encourage you to check it out as well. Really exciting. And if you've never had the opportunity to get up close to Willamette Falls, it's pretty impressive, the amount of water that's coming over and just kind of the energy of the place. I once canoed right up to the foot of the falls, so it was really cool. Our next order is informational items. Are there any information items from staff?
I just wanted to follow up from our last Planning Commission meeting where we had a hearing. Well, we had 3 hearings last time we were together, and one of them was for the addition on a house, and the Planning Commission recommended approving that, and the applicant has filed an appeal, so it's going to go to City Council, and it'll be there on August 6th. I just want you all to know that that was in the works and happening.
Sorry, just to make sure, the applicant filed an, okay.
Sorry. The neighborhood association.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks for clarifying. I was like, why would the applicant?
Nope, sorry, thank you,
approval,
sorry.
Right? No, totally fine. Great, well, yeah, thanks for the heads up there, and look forward to hearing, maybe you could keep us posted.
I'll let you know what happens.
City Council's deliberation there. Any other informational items?
I don't really have anything except for the same pitch I made last time we were together. Just there's a lot going on in the city of Milwaukee over the summer. Now is the time to be out and enjoying all the things. So check out the city calendar for all of the events that are going on and take advantage of this amazing weather that we get a very short window of. So enjoy it while we can.
That's right. We were talking before we got on air about how Porch Fest is starting up soon. So it's a great set of activities there, and there's lots of others as well. Great. Well, if there's nothing else, we'll move on to 4.0 audience participation. We don't have any community members in attendance in the room. What about anyone online? No? Well, if any community members show up and would like to share a perspective with us, they can do so when they get here. So we'll move on to the Community Involvement Advisory Committee. At this point in the agenda, the Planning Commission will act as the Community Involvement Advisory Committee. We'll hold off on any discussions about the work session item where the commission and staff will discuss an overview of the CIAC, but want to just see if any planning commissioners or staff have any anything to discuss in our role as the Community Involvement Advisory Committee. All right, hearing none, we can move on to our work session item of the night. This work session item is a review of the draft transportation system plan goals and policies, draft performance measures memorandum, and draft livable streets analysis and the recommendation memo. Planning Manager Laura Weigel and Associate Planner Ryan Dyer will present the information for discussion. accompanied, I believe, by some consultants from Kittleson and Associates.
Bear with us while we're working on the, there we go. Okay, great. Okay. Just so you all know kind of the flow that we're going to go with tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about the influence of the goals and policies, because we had a lot of conversation, I think, about needing some clarification about what the role of the goals and policies are in this work that we're doing. Then we're going to go straight into the performance measures memorandum, and then we will talk about the revisions to the goals and policies, because we thought that doing the performance measures, talking about the performance measures might help inform a little bit about what we talk about for the revisions for the goals and policies. And then we will go through the draft livable streets analysis. And we do have Jennifer Backus online in case there are any questions that need to be answered regarding the livable streets. And so with that, I am going to hand it over to Ryan first.
Just realized that there was no microphone over here. Just gonna steal this for a second. Cool. Okay. So I guess we just wanted to start this conversation. We sort of realized following our last work session on the goals and policies that we, I think, didn't do the best job communicating how the goals and policies phase of the project influences later stages of the TSP update. So we wanted to take a minute to connect those dots. And this is kind of what was communicated in the staff report as well. And so there are two sort of key areas where the goals and policies influence, I feel like, really shines. One is the performance standards, which Matt from Kittleson is going to elaborate on in more detail. Yeah, I think the goals and policies really inform how we select performance standards. So just briefly, under the new CPEC rules, the city has to adopt two performance standards. One of those standards has to basically make it easier to get around without a car. Performance standards aren't new in transportation planning, but what has changed in terms of the administrative rules is that historically, performance standards have been really focused on facilitating the movement of automobiles. And the new administrative rules are asking us to look sort of beyond that to other modes of transportation as well. So what are performance standards? They're basically what they sound like, where there's some sort of nuance, and I won't get too into the weeds about the distinction between performance measures and performance standards, but basically a standard is the performance measure, the thing that we're measuring, plus a threshold. So again, a performance standard is basically what it sounds like. We are measuring some aspect of the transportation system. We're measuring how it's performing, and then we're establishing a target for improving that aspect of the system. Matt and his team have recommended 4 new performance standards for the city to look at and consider adopting based on the rule requirements and also the city goals and policies. Using measures and targets, performance standards articulate, I think importantly, what our transportation system should look like, and thus the sort of alignment with the goals and policies that we've been talking about. So an example would be a certain percentage of residents should live within a quarter mile of frequent transit by the year 2045. In establishing what that system should look like, we start to get an idea of what our gaps are and what the solutions to those gaps might look like. And then, so this is and I kind of created this flow chart when I was writing the staff report just to kind of wrap my own head around how all of this fits together. And so once we've developed those solutions to address the gaps, we start to put these solutions onto lists. So you'll see the modal element project list, the unconstrained list, the financially constrained list. And this is where the goals and policies, again, start to play a key role in developing evaluation criteria. So you likely saw in your packets the sample evaluation framework. This takes the goals and policies and turns them into criteria that we then use to rank those solutions or projects on these various lists. And the administrative rules do include some specific evaluation criteria outside of the goals and policies that we have to consider, such as reducing climate pollution and equity. But they also encourage jurisdictions to consider local goals and policies. And fortunately for us, I think a lot of those characteristics that the administrative rules are asking jurisdictions to include in their evaluation criteria, they align very well with the goals and policies that have been articulated by the advisory committee and then I think affirmed by Planning Commission here. So I just want to say, as I said in the staff report, that it is a sample. So it didn't reflect the changes that you all articulated when we last met to discuss the goals and policies, but it provides an example of how you could take goals and policies and then use that matrix to evaluate projects. And then lastly, I just wanted to point out, I think we're trying to be really intentional as we go through this process to communicate that the TSP is an important planning exercise, but it is a planning exercise, and that ultimately the projects on our financially constrained list, we're trying to select projects that are likely to get built, but there's a whole nother sort of process, i.e. the capital improvement plan, where transportation projects are competing, so to speak, with other capital projects to receive the discretionary funding that the city has. So we just want to, say that early and often, I guess is what we're trying to do. So yeah, with that, I will turn it over to Matt to talk a little bit more in depth about the performance standards. And I guess while he's coming up here, are there any questions about sort of this relationship between, or just the role that the goals and policies are playing in influencing sort of other aspects of the TSP? Not seeing any.
Not a question, but this is really helpful. This was like a little less clear to me last time, so I appreciate you putting this together. Cool.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that I feel the same way, and this is what I've been asking for. So I really appreciate seeing this, and seeing the sample project was really helpful. To see how the evaluation criteria might be applied, and yeah, I really appreciate seeing this level of detail, about the relationships here. So thanks for putting this together.
Great. Cool. It's all you, Matt.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Matt Hugart. Thanks for inviting me to speak here this evening. Laura and Ryan asked me to kind of give a little bit more of a detailed presentation. This is a very similar presentation that we gave to our two advisory committees, our Technical Advisory Committee and our Citizen Advisory Committee. So thought it would be helpful for you guys to hear a little bit more of the background. Looking at these memos, they're kind of dense. They're tough to read through. A lot of language in there. Not a lot of it is very intuitive. So we'll see if we can give you a little bit better idea of kind of what's in there so that you walk away a little bit more informed. Maybe go to the next slide, Ryan, just to kind of give a little background. So you've heard that term CIAC. It's a climate-friendly and equitable communities. It's basically new legislative language that dictates how transportation system plans in the state of Oregon are going to be performed going forward. This legislation was enacted in 2023 and was modified in 2024. Now, this TSP, development of this new TSP for Milwaukee, it's not funded and scoped to be a completely compliant CFEC-related TSP, but we're doing our best to work within our scope and our budget to work in the direction of achieving these new requirements and these new standards. So what is CFEC and what did it do? Well, basically it brought a new level of planning, focusing on safety, equity, and climate to the forefront of transportation system planning. Now, none of those topics are new, right? We've always kind of done it, but this is a new sort of legislatively mandated way in which TSPs need to be performed. So how does that and what does that look like? Well, there's basically new analysis requirements so that when we assess our project lists, whether it's a list of bicycle and pedestrian projects, transit projects, capacity and roadway enhancement projects, we're going to do so in a couple of different ways. One, we're going to make sure that we're evaluating those projects against the goals and objectives of the city, but we're also going to be a little bit more purposeful in how we evaluate them. One, we're going to look at it more from a climate perspective. How is it moving the needle, or does it move the needle towards improving the state and the city's own climate goals and objectives? And we're going to do it in a way that evaluates those projects in a little bit more of an equitable way. So are we evaluating the improvement projects based on the needs of all citizens, regardless of where they live, who they are, their income, ethnicity, et cetera. So now, again, that's not a new novel concept. It's definitely something we've always kind of done, but it's a little bit more purposeful and required in this new format. And then lastly, there's new requirements for performance-based transportation planning, which Ryan gave you a little bit of an overview of, and I'll get into in a little bit more detail. So next slide, Ryan. So if you're curious, OAR 660-0150 is where a lot of this comes from. It's rooted in there, and it basically obligates Milwaukee to establish its TSP and its inventory based on all modes, and it creates a specific needs determination and a process for assessing different solutions. As I said, we're going to strive to meet these requirements within the context of our budget and our ability to do some of this work. But I will say there isn't a city in the state of Oregon right now that's currently doing what Milwaukee's doing. So we're a little bit of a test case, if you will. We're doing our best, but I think if you looked at the requirements and went by the letter of the new rules, a lot of the scopes and the budgets for these new CFEC related TSPs are going to be double or triple what we have to spend on this project. So it's a recognition that we're doing our best within our current means, but there's likely going to be some expectations that at the end of the day, we're not going to be able to check every single box as we go through this process. This slide, I think, it just kind of reemphasizes, the different modes that we're focusing on here. And particularly in Milwaukee, I think these are our focus modes that we'll be looking at. Next slide. Okay, so performance measures and targets. So Ryan got into this a little bit, but just taking it one kind of layer further. The first thing that the CFEC requirements ask cities and counties and jurisdictions to look at is to be very purposeful and select performance measures that support the region's climate goals. So Milwaukee, as a member of Metro, doesn't have to come up with its own new climate goals. Metro has already done that for us. So at the very basic highest level, we need to make sure that any performance measure and target that we establish for this to support the TSP, the new TSP, needs to at least show progress towards the metro performance climate goals and objectives. So those are basic requirements that talk about reduction of greenhouse gas targets. In this particular slide here is just a sampling of a three-page, a sampling of one of 3 pages of Metro's climate-friendly climate goals. And you can read them. Some of them are very, very specific, such as a share of households living in a mixed use development within the UGB. Climate start strategy baseline of 26% with a target of 37%. So it gets, some of these things are very specific. Again, this is just a sampling of different pages, but from a transportation perspective, one of the targets here is daily vehicle miles per capita. So right now, the baseline models are showing that metro-wide, we're about 19%. And the target, we want to get that down to something less than that. So 17, 15%, something like that. So that's how the climate element fits into the Milwaukee's TSP update. That's the good news. We don't have to come up with our own climate objectives, but we can within our goals and specific goals and objectives if we want to. So the next layer is looking at the selection of performance measures and evaluation criteria. And as Ryan shared earlier, those performance measures and evaluation criteria are going to be used in a lot of different ways. So all of the good work and the review comments that we've received to date to refine those goals and objectives, we gave a little bit of an insight into how those will be evaluated and used to select projects and prioritize those projects as we get into the process. And then lastly, this TSP will determine and use and adopt 2 or more new performance standards. And I'll show a slide on what at least the initial recommendation is at the current. So what are those new performance standards? Well, number one, I think first and foremost, the city probably needs to maintain its an operations standard. So operations is traffic engineering terms for measuring the performance on the roadway system. So right now, Milwaukee uses a level of service standard, and it's a graded standard that measures delay for vehicles. Now it's very vehicle-focused standard. And not that we want to turn our backs on the vehicles, but they're still going to be an important part of the transportation system. So at a very basic level, we ought to at least maintain an operations standard. Now, whether or not the city chooses to stick with level of service or go to a different performance standard, such as volume to capacity ratio, there's pros and cons of doing that. But we would recommend, at least from the consultant team's perspective, that you at least have and maintain at least one operations-based standard for the roadway network. Now, what the CIAC requirements are asking us to do is adopt two or more new performance standards supporting alternate modes of transportation, whether it be transit, bicycle, pedestrian, et cetera. So the 4 that we have kind of recommended initially, and barring any additional feedback and thoughts, they are what we call system completeness, bicycle level of traffic stress, pedestrian level of traffic stress, and accessibility to transit. So get into a little bit more about what those mean here in a second. But before we do that, I think when we are selecting these performance standards, whether we stick with the 4 that we had initially recommended or we select something different, there's a couple of different things that we ought to be thinking about. Number one, do those performance standards support Metro's climate smart strategy measures? So that white table we showed a couple slides back. Or can we at least draw a parallel between those standards and Metro's goals for improving climate objectives? Do they support increasing transportation options? So again, it's one of the fundamental aspects of these new requirements. More importantly, it's one thing to select standards, but once we're done creating the new TSP, can your staff use them, right? Do they have the tools to be able to analyze them? A lot of those performance standards that we could potentially select require some very complicated travel demand models, and the city of Milwaukee doesn't run its own travel demand model. Metro runs one for the entire metro area. So we don't want to be beholden to Metro every time we want to analyze the impact of a new project or a development project. So selecting measures that staff and the tools that they have are important. Lastly, or second to last, do they support your own TSP goals? So certainly we've done a lot of work crafting some draft goals and objectives. We don't want to deviate from those, or at least make sure we're tying everything back in a nice, neat package. And then I think lastly, where it really kind of rubber meets the road on some of these is, are they supported by our partnering agencies? Milwaukee, as its own jurisdiction, can do what it wants and what it feels to be the most appropriate. But if you're selecting a performance standard that isn't consistent with what Clackamas County uses to some level or what ODOT uses to some level, they own and operate some of the roads within city jurisdiction. So it almost always makes sense to make sure that you're in alignment with your partnering agencies. So maybe if you can go back 2 slides, I'll give you just a quick overview of what some of these performance standards mean. So system completeness is one of those standards where you can kind of look back and set a goal for yourself by saying, you know, within 20 years, we want to make sure that all of our collector and arterial streets in the city, or 90% of those collector and arterial streets have sidewalks or bicycle lanes or some kind of improved of physical infrastructure. Or we want to maybe set ourselves a goal to say X% of our local streets should have sidewalks or should be retrofitted with sidewalks or some enhanced infrastructure element. So those system completeness requirements allow you to set targets for yourself for improving and measuring how you're doing over time. Now, a lot of that's going to be contingent upon your ability to fund projects. But if you can identify projects that move that needle more than others, right, then that's good from a prioritization standpoint. The next 2, bicycle level of traffic stress and pedestrian level of traffic stress, are kind of new ways. They're not novel. They've been around for a number of years, but they're new ways to analyze and assess the performance of the travelways when it comes to accommodating pedestrian and bicyclists. So to use an example, if you're a cyclist, you're going to perceive different roadways differently than, say, a young child. And as a parent, you're probably going to perceive those even more differently if you're going to let your kids bike on certain roadways. So when we talk about bicycle level of traffic stress, we can change how much stress cyclists sense or feel on roadways based on how we design those roads. So a roadway in which a cyclist shares the roadway with motorists can feel a little bit more stressful depending upon who you are and how experienced you are. A bicycle or a street with a bicycle lane where you have your own dedicated space is going to feel less stressful at certain levels. And a roadway that has a buffered bicycle lane where you're separated from the adjacent travel lane by a painted stripe on the road or a separated pathway, you're going to feel even more comfortable biking on those streets. So we can set level of traffic stress standards for certain classifications of roadways to help prioritize and address those. And the pedestrian level of traffic stress operates very similarly to the bicycle one. So. Then lastly is an accessibility to transit measures. So as we're looking to better serve different portions and neighborhoods in the city, we want to at least maybe try and find a measure that works towards making connections. So it's not always about identifying new transit routes to serve neighborhoods. You know, TriMet kind of runs its own show, and certainly it works with local communities to ensure that they're meeting the needs of those communities. But at the same level, they're not going to serve a neighborhood that doesn't have certain level of characteristics. Can they get their buses there, or does it have enough is it densely populated enough to support reallocating transit lines to certain parts of the street? So it may not be about putting transit on certain roadways, but it may be about providing connections from those neighborhoods that don't have transit service to adjacent or nearby transit lines and improving the connections to and from those areas. So that could be part of the accessibility to the transit measure that we're talking about. I've been talking for quite a while here. Let me pause because I think this is a natural place to answer questions if you have any.
Thanks, Matt. I guess in terms of questions, are you looking maybe for clarifying questions, or are we going into feedback, or is there kind of additional in terms of the slide deck? Look to either you or Laura, I guess, on that one.
Yes to everything, I guess?
Yes to everything, great.
Is that right, Dennis?
Yeah, on to the meat and potatoes of the work session. Sounds good. Well, great. Thanks for the presentation. Really appreciate it. And I think, in terms of some of the added detail you provided there, just flagging for any planning commissioners or even anyone tuning in, kind of a summary of some of the performance measures are on page 26 of the PDF packet. So, well, I'll open it up for questions or discussion from any members of the commission. Commissioner Edge, go for it.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. It's really pretty clear. I think what everything is doing and what you're explaining. So I don't really have any clarifying questions, but I did want to know, in terms of an operational standard, is there something more along the lines of a usable, in this context, 24-hour capacity framework metric that we could be using as an evaluation instead of the kind of peak metric for like volume capacity ratio or level of service?
Yeah. In fact, the one that I think has been gathering quite a bit of attention lately is vehicle miles traveled per capita. That's a mouthful, but essentially it's a way of assessing how much demand your vehicle demand you have on the roadway system, right, over a particular time frame. And it's measured again per capita, right? So I think if you looked at the city as a microcosm of the larger metro area, Metro's goals are not to build our way out of capacity, right, or build our way out of congestion, but to recognize congestion is an important part of a healthy environment and ensure that we're putting more, more money into alternate modes of transportation, be it transit, land use compatible transit development, alternate modes, pedestrian, bicycle, et cetera. So the vehicle miles traveled per capita is one of those. Now, as I go back to that list of why certain jurisdictions would select certain performance measures, the key one, I think, in many ways is, can the local jurisdiction work with that measure? And how applicable is it when you are trying to make certain decisions? Be it, as I heard earlier, you had a couple of hearings last week, or last commission hearing, where there was some kind of development project. Don't know any of the details, but I'm assuming there was more likely potentially a transportation impact associated with one or more of those. Well, if there could be.
Well, we've had others.
We've had them in the past, I'm sure.
Yeah.
We're familiar.
Yeah. So, can you use VMT per capita? How sensitive is it? Well, certainly it's probably sensitive if you're looking at a major redevelopment, like an old hospital site, for example, and you want to completely change the land use character of that and densify it and put new housing on that site. You're probably going to be able to move the needle with something of that size, but a small shopping complex, or I don't know, just something really unique or non-specific, like a new McDonald's or something, it's not going to be a measure that's very sensitive to things like that. And certainly it's going to be a measure where you're going to be beholden to Metro to run the models for you and spit out the analysis outputs to determine whether there's any sensitivity to it. So you almost have to always be very careful when you select your performance measures to make sure that you can actually work with them and use them and use them in a way to measure the standards for which your goals and objectives have set yourself up for.
So is it safe to say it was a performance kind of standard or measure that you evaluated, but it sounds like I'm just hearing you don't think it's feasible kind of in this use case.
This is one of the scenarios where you're going first, you're learning through trials and tribulations a little bit of what you can and can't do. There's been a lot of work that Metro and ODOT have done to look at different performance standards. In fact, I don't know if they were kind of listed in the performance measures memo. There's 26 of them, I think, that a separate committee has been working on over the last several years. And they've put a little matrix together to identify which of those measures like best meet the requirements and the typical needs of jurisdictions like Milwaukee and other cities like it. And certainly measures like VMT per capita are very useful, but not very useful in certain settings. And the ones that we selected, we felt were ones that we thought helped move the needle in a lot of different forms of applications, land use applications that you're going to be looking at. And also your staff, I think, can work with them and use them for perpetuity going forward. So.
Great, thanks. Commissioner Edge, I'm going to guess you have other questions, so I'll invite you to jump back in.
Yeah, I just kind of drilling into the same thing. I'm just wondering if if we would have the capacity to do something like different than just the peak demand, like kind of that peak 15-minute demand period for our vehicle to capacity ratios or demand capacity ratio or whatever we're referring to it as, is something like a 16-hour efficiency or total hours below capacity, or is there some other metric that's within the kind of the scope of the city's abilities that isn't necessarily something more complex? Like, I'm a big fan of VMT per capita. Don't get me wrong, but I understand what you're saying about when you're dealing with smaller land use applications that might still have to produce an impact analysis. So would we be able to use something other than just peak period demand as our standard for whether or not a roadway has, road lane, general purpose travel lanes have enough capacity? Because, again, the problem with that is that most of the day doesn't see the same, level of congestion as the peak period. And so, we really would want to ideally focus on, not building things up to the capacity for what's important for the most busy 15 minutes of the day, but maybe, the most busy, 4 hours of the day or 6 hours of the day.
Yeah. No, it's a great point and not taken not lightly. Yes, I'm not getting into the details of these operational standards that we've been talking about. I just scratched the surface, and you're getting much deeper. And I think the reality is when we get to the point of trying to work through these in much more detail, what you're referring to is a very plausible and potential scenario the city can consider. It's not about peak 15 minutes anymore. I think Metro as a whole, ODOT, in coordination with that, recognizes that, hey, if we're gonna have to measure the capacity of a roadway, it can't be on a short period of time at the peak of the peak. It's gonna have to be measured over a longer period of time. So there's already some allowances in the Oregon Highway Plan and in the Metro RTP that accommodates a 2-hour standard, and there's potentially even to adjust that further. So yeah, there's a lot of details that we don't have to worry about at the moment. The basic recommendation is let's make sure we at least maintain at least some kind of performance standard for the roadway network. So.
Well, that sounds great. I think and Commissioner Edge, if you have anything else, I'd certainly say that's something I think I'm also supportive of. So I really appreciate you bringing it up, Commissioner Edge. And I think as you all move forward in that, we could kind of figure out how to fine tune that. Maybe just kind of for the sake of facilitation, I was thinking we can continue if there's anything else on what are we talking, performance level of, level of service, and then maybe we can take the potential performance standards one by one. That just might be a helpful way, so we're not pinballing around. I guess, is there anything else on level of service that anyone cares to discuss? And more than happy to do so. I just wanted to kind of propose a framework for the conversation. All right, hearing none. Well, let's move then to the 4 potential performance standards that are being recommended by the consultant team at Kittleson. The first one, system completeness. I think I'd be curious to maybe just hear a little bit more from staff or the consultant team in terms of including multimodal maps, identifying gaps, total miles. Like, can you just kind of talk more about, we're not there yet, right? And so I'm just like, paint me a picture. What does some of this look like?
Sure. Yeah, it can occur in a lot of different ways. It's a very, I think, pliable measure that we have a lot of autonomy to adjust as we see fit. So I guess you can look at it as just an example. One measure of system completeness would just be percentage of local streets with sidewalks on them, right? That's a very measurable thing. We have the tools at our disposal right this minute to say, you've got X% of your local street network with sidewalks. And we can set a goal for ourselves to say, we want that X% to be Y% within a 20-year period. That gives us something to work towards. So that would be, a very simple version of a system completeness standard. Now you can go take that to every other mode and you can get much more detailed and nuanced as you get into other modes. But I think I'll stick to that simple one for now. So what are the positives and negatives associated with system completeness? Well, I think system completeness, one, is very measurable. And it works great when you're working within the context of a large scale planning effort like the new TSB. So it's going to be great when we've got a set of projects before us at the latter stages of this project. Let's say we've got 20 corridor projects that we're going to be assessing, and all of them have some level of sidewalk enhancement or bicycle lane enhancement to them. But we're going to be able to say at the end of the day that project A is going to be better than project B because it's producing more potential bicycle lanes on the network. And that's, again, something we can measure. So it's great when we're talking about prioritizing projects at the large scale planning effort. It's not as great when you're looking at land use applications, for example, down the road, right? So it's a great planning tool. It's a poor land use application assessment tool because typically in a city like Milwaukee, you're not dealing with large scale development, redevelopment. You're looking at infill development in many ways, or you're looking at small scale development projects that may or may not have result in any change to the pedestrian environment or the bicycle environment. So you may find that it's a measure that doesn't move the needle. It doesn't allow you to say whether or not it's going to be impactful to the system or not. So now there's exceptions to that, but I'm keeping it at very basic high level here. So I think that's how I would look at the system completeness as an example. So.
Thanks, that's really helpful. And I think I wasn't thinking about it in the way that you were describing, and so maybe I'll just give my offhand comment because, I think as I was looking at some of the recommended performance standards later on about accessibility to transit, and it was kind of a recommendation of evaluate the percentage of the city that is within a half and quarter mile of transit. I was also thinking in the system completeness space, and so maybe you could tell me if this would be helpful or not, but also evaluating the percentage of the city that's within a half mile and quarter mile of neighborhood greenways. Because I think we want to build out that network more. So I don't know if something like that would something like that be useful in the system completeness space?
Yeah, okay. That's one way you can recraft the term system completeness in a way that's different from just looking at, percentage of
built out sidewalks or paved roads. Yeah, okay, great. Any other thoughts, questions on system completeness? That was, I think, the main one that I had.
Maybe just a point of clarification. Are these performance standards meant to be an all-encompassing high level, all the way down to land use level projects?
Yeah, I think, that's one of the things that we want to do is not only we're creating them to be consistent with your goals and objectives, to help you achieve those goals and objectives, but within the context of the new TSP, they're going to be used to prioritize the list of projects. We're probably going to have more projects at the end of the day than we have funding. So we're going to have to find a way to prioritize those projects where, that we are likely to have funding for, and rank them in certain ways so that we can make sure that the aspirational projects stay in the aspirational, and the ones that are really plausible get moved up accordingly. So we want to use them, and then, to your point, they want to be useful. They should be useful when looking at changes to the system going forward. The TSP is meant to be a living document, but where the rubber meets the road is when you are starting to look at actual land use and how that land use changes over time and how it's proposed to change over time.
And in this process, is there a measuring stick, excuse me, to help determine which performance standard to actually use, what's applicable in any given situation? Or is that part of this discussion? Or I don't know if that makes sense or not, but when do we say, system completeness makes more sense over accessibility to transit? In that sense.
It's hard to question for me to answer because I can't foresee how it all plays out. Again, we're a test case in many ways, so we're the first community in Oregon to be dealing with this. No other communities have certainly set performance measures. Again, it's not a novel concept. We're just doing it in a very different way. I don't know. That's a good question. I think you want to be flexible. That's my best answer at this point, is make sure you don't put yourself in a corner where you can't use them if you want to. So.
Commissioner Foynmayor, Commissioner Mulhorn, Commissioner Edge?
Are we still going through the performance measures one by one?
Yeah.
Or are we?
If you don't mind.
So yeah, no, I don't have any specific comments about system completeness other than, it's, I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense as a goal, or, as a measure here.
Great. Well, maybe we'll move on to the next one, bicycle level of traffic stress. We can always come back to something if anyone has a aha moment along the way. Do you want to give a quick refresh on BLTS?
Sure. I'll just kind of speak them in the same vein because they're very similar measures. One just is very specific to bicyclists, the other specific to pedestrians. I think maybe I've already explained a little bit about what they do. It's just a way of assessing how well a facility would function and feel for different layers of I don't know, comfortable
rider abilities.
Rider abilities. Yes, thank you for helping me fill in. So I guess when you talk about it in terms of its applicability, again, it's another one of those measures that works well in a planning process because in some way, shape, and form, we might have a set of projects where we're going to take a corridor, pick a collector in the city that maybe hasn't been updated in some time. And we've prioritized that corridor because it provides access to a key destination or two, or access between key destinations. And it doesn't have any improvements on it. We may choose to select a project that says, you know what, rather than just put a bike lane on that collector and call it good, let's put a separated multi-use path on that collector. And let's really make sure that this is a roadway that of fourth grader biking to elementary school would feel comfortable using, and a parent would allow their kid to do at the same level that experienced seasoned cyclist would feel comfortable. So that's one of those projects where you can then say, you know what, a standard bike lane, while cheaper, and certainly maybe more implementable in the long run or in the near term, certainly isn't going to stack up as well from a level of traffic stress that separated multi-use path would have. So it's really one of those measures that I think can be gauged in certain levels against, and certainly it works well when you're talking about key destinations, particularly around schools and shopping centers and places where various riders of all abilities are going to want to try and get to. So it works well in that set. And also, I think it has some applicability to development projects as well. When you're talking about maybe frontage improvements, as a city, you'd like to be able to say, hey, you know what, we would like you, developer, to dedicate additional right-of-way for that multi-use pathway across your frontage, even though the neighboring properties to the east and west of you might not be developing or redeveloping. We want to at least get that right-of-way for that because it will change the character of that corridor significantly for riders of various abilities, more so than just that 6-foot dedication that gives you the bicycle lane. So it's one of those measures that I think also works at the development level. Now I can't get into all the nuanced details, but that's maybe one way where it can withstand and be used at different layers at the development side.
Great, thanks for the quick overview. Thoughts, questions on BLTS as a performance standard? We can also give silent, full-throated endorsements.
I don't know the alternative that's better to suggest here. Personally, I don't feel like this is granular enough, to really capture the perception of, stress when you're out riding a bike. 4 stages of stress, is I think not granular enough to really, reflect all of reality. But I don't know a better alternative. And I feel like this is gaining some traction as a standard. Obviously it's being presented here. The county is using it in its walk bike plan update. So, I feel like it's probably the right thing to do here, for what it's worth, even though I have my questions or, my difficulties with it. I think it's the right choice to use here. And, I guess, if we feel like doing this now, if we're prepared to do this now, it might be kind of nice to see some visuals of, what is a BLTS 1 versus a BLTS 2 or 3, scenario. If we had if staff had some images readily available that they can, share, that might be great. But, or when this comes up in the future, we can, talk about it. It'd be great to see visuals to go along with it. Because it would be nice to know, if we're endorsing BLTS level 2, as kind of the standard for collectors and arterials, in the TSP, what does that actually mean, right? I know that, it says that it's easily measurable by information that staff has available. That's great, but how is it experienced on the ground? What does the BLTS 2 actually feel like when you're out there riding a bike as someone who may not ride, all that often? Am I really comfortable on King Road, with a BLTS 2 facility? Just on something scenario like that, I'd like to know what we're working with and what we're actually, kind of endorsing at the policy level.
Yeah, thanks so much, Commissioner Edge. I think it was my kind of comment as well, where I think I'm totally comfortable with it as a performance standard, and yet I actually spent a little bit of time reading about it. Some City of Boston, City of Seattle, MobiCon, a consulting firm, Alta Planning and Design, and it doesn't sound like there is a consistent methodology. And so, I want to get into what's our methodology going to be, so that we can kind of talk about that. I think at a high level, I think the performance standard makes sense. It's a question of what the dials are, so that again, if you're on a BLTS 1, you know it, and when you're on a 2, you know it, as opposed to maybe something different. I think another question or comment, I guess, putting my CIAC hat on, Community Involvement Advisory Committee, I think we should make a map. And I think you all are going to make a map anyways. So let's put this map up on our kind of stale GIS website for the city, so anyone can see where the BLTS 1s and 2s. And I think we should show where the 3s and the 4s are as well. So, again, just so people can kind of see it and say, yeah, that's right, or no, that's not right.
It's a great idea. I don't think we have that map, and I don't know that we're going to develop that map just as part of this process.
Oh, it sounds like
The
it'll
levels
be,
of service?
or the BLTS 1 and 2, sounds like that'll get mapped.
Okay, is that correct, Matt?
Yeah, so now we're
Sorry.
venturing into different, the next stages of this project, which right now we're going to be going through the existing conditions analysis, and we're going to be looking at, we have the ability to create, not at the very precise level, because we only have so much volume information on our roadways, but we're going to be able to sort of project and estimate levels of traffic stress on different facilities based on the types of bicycle accommodations that they have. And that'll be part of our needs and gaps analysis that we're
Okay.
quickly moving into here. So,
Sorry for that.
yep.
Yeah, so at that point, you'll probably come up with a map, right? Yeah. Cool. I was also going to just suggest that in the description, in the key considerations piece of the table, it talks about BLTS 2 is often used as a target, appeals to a majority of potential bike riding population. BLTS, it's like the sandwich or something, is desired within a quarter mile of schools. And I was just kind of curious on like the quarter mile of schools, like why quarter mile, maybe specifically, and then especially when knowing, as someone who has children and lives close enough to a school that we are not within a quarter mile and we don't get bus service. So you walk or you bike or you drive to school, so just kind of questioning like why the quarter mile, maybe not a half mile as well, for us to think about that. And then it also says BLTS desired within a quarter mile of schools. I was also thinking, if we're really achieving our goals, our neighborhood greenways should also have a BLTS 1. And maybe, and I know it mentions evaluating collector and arterials, but I think we should also evaluate the neighborhood greenways and see if they're meeting some of those conditions. I think that's it for me on this topic. I'm really excited about this. I don't know if anyone else has any questions or comment on this performance standard. Yeah, Ernestina.
Yes, my question was going to be about connecting those different standards and like how you measure, like, but how do all the system work? Like, I understand, like you have how do you explain this? Like you have like the city will have a street that will have one level and then another block might have another level, or maybe connects to another level. How do you make the transition? How do you measure that? Is like, for me as a parent who want to drive out with the kid, I'm afraid to get out of my house with my kid because I will have to like slowly go to one side and then like send them to the sidewalk and send them in. So that kind of just kind of thinking about how that works into a bigger picture and how that gets measured into the standards. Like that's my question.
Yeah, I think something we're going to be grappling with here over the next several months, 6 months or so. I think, yes, every one of these measures works with the other measures to some extent. So just an example, there's plenty of neighborhoods in Milwaukee that were developed with streets that have no sidewalks on them, right? And there's no sidewalks and most likely never will be, given the funding constraints and limitations that we have for retrofitting old roadways like that. But at the same time, some of those streets probably have traffic volumes on them that are not high enough to where you probably couldn't, feel comfortable to a certain level walking on them. But at the same time, if there is a neighborhood that has no pedestrian accommodations and there's a school nearby or there's a key destination where you can reasonably expect there to be demand between that neighborhood and that key destination, then I think we owe it to ourselves from an equity standpoint and from just a good planning standpoint to recognize those gaps and use our measures to prioritize projects on those roadways where we don't have them and where it makes the most sense. And if there's a logical way to get from point A to point B and there's no service of any kind on those streets, then we ought to find the best way to do it. And then through this new equity-based analysis, we might find that we're going to prioritize this project more so than a project in an equally deserving part of town that maybe has better accessibility to transit, So it's a way to kind of let these measures all work with each other and find the gaps, those obvious gaps and those hidden gaps in the system, and look at them from different ways. It's not always about BLTS or PLTS or system completeness. We want to use the tools that we have to find the overlapping gaps and where it really overlaps. If it's poor at the BLTS and it's poor at the PLTS and it's poor at the system completeness, that should be jumping your project way up to the top of the priority list. So, yeah.
Or vice versa, right?
Or-
If it's high, anyway, sorry.
I think we all-
I think we all understood. And I think Commissioner Fuenmayor, I think probably and I think it was mentioned, but maybe just for everyone to kind of get to it of, in a year and a half from now, we're going to be sitting near the end of this process. Maybe it's only a year at this point. And we're going to have a giant list of projects, and that community members are going to be helping inform and choose. And that list of projects is going to be coming to us, and you all, through these performance standards, if this is the route that we go, we're going to use it to start to rank projects. And we're going to figure out which projects make the top cut list and which ones stay on the other good but great list. And maybe one day they get funded, maybe they don't, but that top cut list is what's going to become, generally some of the priority projects unless other funding opportunities come up and things like that. And so I think the conversations we're having today is helping, and the conversations the TSP Advisory Committee have had are helping, refine what some of these key criteria are to help say this project is better, is better than that one.
Yeah, just real quick, you had sort of touched on this. So is it true that generally a project that would score well in terms of reducing BLTS would also probably score well in terms of reducing PLTS? Or is there sometimes competition there to where we need to make a decision of, I guess, implicitly which of those is valued more within a project? Because I think that would be an interesting thing to understand is there a way to prioritize projects that really do meet both those standards? And maybe that's just what happens when this is actually operationalized. So maybe I'm overthinking it a bit, but just trying to avoid that tension between these two different modes of transit, I think is important.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. You're more than likely going to find scenarios where you're actually moving the needle in both. But sometimes when you, for example, if you were to identify a project where you want to improve the bicycling of environment for cyclists, well, okay, let's just use the simple scenario of adding a bike lane, right? A bike lane is great because it gives bicyclists, a defined space in the roadway to travel. But at the same time, it's creating a buffer for the pedestrian that might be on that curb-tight sidewalk, right? So if you think of a street that has a curb-tight sidewalk immediately adjacent to a travel lane, you're feeling the cars whoosh by, you can feel the air, you don't feel as comfortable, but you put a bike lane, right? It's 6 feet of pavement, but you feel a lot more comfortable. So we could be moving the needle in both just by accommodating one mode over the other. Now, it works positively for pedestrians. It doesn't work in reverse for cyclists because they're always going to be adjacent to the travel lane, but that's how it could be overlapped. And I don't know, to answer your question, if there's a way to prioritize one over the other. I think that starts with your goals and objectives. And if you really feel like cycling is the way to move Milwaukee towards the future vision more so than pedestrians, then that should be reflected there. No, I don't think that's the case, but that's how you could potentially adjust it.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Commissioner Edge?
Thank you, Chair. So that question about the tension actually brings up a good this is something I think we need to be thinking about. I don't know that we are, and I don't know that it's necessarily, I don't know. I'm not sure at what point that we need to really be, thinking about this a whole lot, but I hope we get to this point. It's already a problem in some places, like on the trolley trail. There's, there are conflicts between, because it's a safe facility, it's a separated facility, you're not parallel, not on a roadway. And there's long stretches without any intersections. And so there's a tendency of it attracts riders who want to go fast. Also attracts people who want to stroll through the neighborhood. And so there are conflicts between faster moving bicycle riders and slower moving pedestrians, or even slower moving bicyclists, depending on, age or other factors. So there is competition, I think, for some of these high quality, safer feeling facilities. And so I'm wondering, does BLTS or PLTS capture that in some way to where, a separated sidewalk and separated protected bicycle lane would score better than, say, the combination multi-use path that's along, Linwood, for instance? Because, it is more stressful, particularly as a pedestrian and presumably as someone who wants to ride my bike and get somewhere at the other end of this stretch of road, more quickly when I come up on, a group of pedestrians across the whole path. So, I feel like that there is something here that we need to be thinking about at a policy level. I don't know that we were really there in the conversation, along the development of this plan yet to be having this conversation, but are we? And did these metrics reflect that kind of challenge or that dynamic?
I feel like I should know the answer to your question. Is BLTS sensitive within the multi-use trail environment as a standalone medium? I don't know the answer to that question. It's a good one. So I might have to table that one and come back to you. I don't believe that research has been done, but intuitively, I think you can probably understand that, a major multi-use pathway that's chock full of regional bicycle commuters isn't going to work well with the strolling pedestrian environment that's just out for a nice walk in the afternoon. So great question. I don't think I can answer the specifics still.
Yeah, it's great question and great point there, Commissioner Edge, and one maybe we'll have to grapple with as we move forward in the project. Yeah. Anything else on BLTS, or can we move on to PLTS? We've kind of already made the transition, so how about I just move us there? I think maybe I'll lead off and just say, again, I think this is will be a helpful performance standard, and would just suggest, as I did with BLTS, that we think about maybe going up to half a mile within schools. Again, just thinking about walk sheds, especially since bus collection areas don't get that close. And I think that's kind of maybe my primary feedback on that one.
I just support I just want to say that I support the comments about extending that walk shed out to maybe a half mile. A quarter mile doesn't seem like quite enough. But it also depends on the kinds of facilities maybe. So, obviously as we're close to schools, is this intended to apply to local service streets that are low volume, anyway? Or are there, maybe because they're low volume at the VLTS or PLTS one anyway. I think trying to extend that out to where, particularly on, streets that have higher traffic counts, that we're, looking at, a half mile from schools.
Yep.
Anything else on PLTS? Acronym soup tonight. Accessibility to transit. Commissioner Mulhorn, yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Real quick on this one. So I think in the first paragraph there, it says, or I'm looking at the table on page 24. So it talks about developing a complete and usable, and that includes scheduling and routing data that can be cumbersome. But then the actual metric at the bottom looks like it just looks at proximity to transit. So I'm just curious how the routing and scheduling factors in to that metric, or is that maybe a further down the road item?
Yeah, I think one we're going to have to take a closer look at, in a scenario where Milwaukee is not serving doesn't have its own transit system. It's part of TriMet. TriMet has a collection of experienced transit planners who look at a lot of different nuanced metrics when they're determining whether line 12 goes on this roadway or that roadway. And more often than not, they've selected the route that they selected to best serve and meet the needs of that community. So I think in a community like Milwaukee, we're going to have to kind of flip that script a little bit. And it's not about our ability to assess whether that line is most appropriate for that roadway. It's to work with Milwaukee and work with TriMet and ensure that they're doing their job to best meet those needs, and then encourage them to consider changing land use and environments as they grow and modify over time. So I think it's a little bit more on that latter comment that you made, such as, how are different neighborhoods in Milwaukee, how close are they to transit, and how can we use some of those other measures to make those connections more reliable or better for the different groups that need to get from point A to point B. So this is where I think we're going to have to be a little bit more careful with how we use it going forward.
Thanks. That makes a lot of sense.
Commissioner Edge?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I think what I was wondering here is, and I kind of understand, obviously, TriMet's in charge of scheduling, so, this could change, but what if we were to use distance from frequent transit, or in the words of, the, CIAC transit planning rule or transportation planning rule updates, the most frequent transit in the community or whatever. So that, because we've got frequent transit on Max Line, frequent transit on King Road and Harrison, and then projected to get frequent transit on Linwood. And so, and I think that, do we just want to measure this for all transit opportunities, or are we specifically trying to prioritize, getting to the most, the transit lines with the most utility for people who need to use it?
Yeah, it's whatever your desires are, I believe. What is your priority? There's only so many transit lines in Milwaukee, and there's only so many frequent transit lines in Milwaukee. And I don't know if Milwaukee's demographics are shifting fast enough in certain areas to where you're going to be able to show measurable needs and changing needs. But I think this is where that equity element comes into play a little bit more. Is can we prioritize certain neighborhoods more so than we ever have before, and can we create the metrics to help identify those neighborhoods that don't have transit service today, and can we work with TriMet to push that transit service in that direction? So I think it's what can Milwaukee control and what can't control, what Milwaukee can control, and prioritizing. I think transit service is a TriMet combination, but prioritizing projects that get neighborhoods to existing transit lines is something that the city can control. So that's kind of how I would use the accessibility to transit metric, is what can we control, what can't we control.
Cool, thanks for that perspective.
I don't know if staff happen to know, but, TriMet, I think, has finished up their Forward Together? And so I'm assuming their plans a year or so ago to, reroute the 71. No? Hasn't happened. Do we know an ETA on that?
My understanding was that it was driver demand, or they were struggling to hire enough drivers
Okay.
And I reached out and did not end up hearing back.
So just in case you couldn't hear, because Ryan's mic was pointed a little bit away, but Ryan was just saying that it doesn't sound like the 71 rerouted onto Linwood for frequent service has occurred yet. And it sounds like driver demand issues or maybe some of the operational challenges TriMet's facing there. So maybe as part of this process, we could get an official update from them on, especially as we're thinking about things like access to transit as one of our key performance indicators.
I'll see what I can find out.
Yeah, great, thank you. And I think that takes us to the end of these potential performance standards. Is there anything else anyone wants to circle back on this topic? Hearing none. Were we also going to talk about livable streets or not?
We are going to talk about
Okay.
livable streets tonight, yeah. So the order right now is to go back into the goals and policies,
Okay,
but we
great.
could go to livable streets too.
Nope,
Okay.
whatever. I wasn't sure what the run of show was, so you've got us in good hands.
All right, great. Thank you. So now, thank you so much, Matt, for that. And then we'll do this for a little while, and then we'll jump back into livable streets. So I think that in your packet, you saw that what we did is we gave you the two versions. We gave you a marked up version. So we wanted you to see that Ryan and I actually spent quite a bit of time trying to go through all of the comments that you all made and accommodating the best that we could. Sometimes we made adjustments where some of the recommendations, we didn't have enough to kind of create a whole nother set of policies. So we combined some things for efficiency. So we really worked through everything. And I think it might behoove you to look at, we also provided the accepted changes version of it, if that's helpful. So if you all want to provide any more feedback and kind of this for now, just so you're aware, once we'll take any feedback you all have tonight, and then it goes to City Council for review and they will add their feedback. And so that's not to say that minor tweaks won't get made along the way, but they're pretty much where they need to be for now moving forward. So this is kind of our last big conversation about these. So I just wanted to put that out there. And then they can change too, based on what City Council says, so.
Well, and then we'll have to go talk to City Council about that. No. Planning Commission joke. Ryan, are you trying to queue these up?
I'm sharing. Give me 1 second.
Okay. Yeah.
You can see them.
Well, yeah, and
Maybe see them.
maybe as we're getting AV working here in the room, really wanted to say thanks for all the work that you and probably Ryan has done more of the work have done
We
here.
sat together for a while.
Spent a lot of time together. The amount of track changes is a good way to always prove to people you're working hard. And I felt like generally in looking at this that you did a really nice job kind of incorporating some of the feedback that we started to provide. I'm sure folks might have some additional questions as we get going, but I wanted to just say that generally.
Thank you.
Maybe in terms of, facilitation, maybe I do think it just helps organize things if maybe we just take them in order again, because that just might help us stay on topic and not pinball around. So our first kind of updated goal is equitable transportation. There's some changes that were made here. Open it up for conversation, and maybe just even for the sake of efficiency, feel free to just speak up. We don't need to raise hands or thanks, Chair, or any of those formalities.
Great.
Hearing none on that, great. So the second one, climate mitigation and adaptation. This is one, I think there was some changes in response to, I think, some of the helpful feedback from Commissioner Mulhorn. Any questions, comments from the Planning Commission?
I think I would just say, since I think I gave the feedback on this, this captured well what I was hoping to see. And yeah, I think this is really good. So thank you.
Very much agreed there. We'll give it a going once, going twice. We can move on to healthy environment. This was also something Commissioner Edge, I think, helped frame out. I also thought this did a really nice job, but definitely as new content, want to open it up for comment or question.
Yeah, I think this really does capture, I mean, and most of my comments about, you know, what you put in front of us tonight are general. And so I wasn't really going to pick on, you know, one specific goal, but I think that, you know, since this is the one I asked for and you've delivered it, I wanted to comment specifically. And so I think that this does a very good job of capturing the concerns that that I was trying to you know, put out there in terms of, you know, how the transportation system, you know, intersects with, you know, these concerns. And so I feel like you've done a very good job with these policies. I'm really happy with what I see here. Yeah, so that's not going to add anything more specific about this goal or its policies right here. I think you've done a really good job. I'll mostly save, I think, the rest of my comments for the end of the section, and I'll just comment on this generally.
Okay, great. Maybe a small, very tactical word edit on number 1, prioritize transportation improvements that preserve natural resources. I was maybe just going to suggest preserve and enhance or enhance, just knowing there might be some investments that enhance things as opposed to just preserving them, but maybe that's the English major in me. Anything else on this one?
This is more of a global edit, but where possible, how can we strengthen some of those action words to where I know they're policies and not necessarily, obviously not standards, but words like prioritize or consider or minimize, can we be more direct in using those words?
Where do we pull out the shalls?
Right. Could or may. Again, I know it's not standards we're dealing with, but we're looking at policies, but can we still drive it home a little harder? It's just a general global comment, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a consistent, like, finding that right balance, because understanding that we're not always going to be able to do more than consider, that we have to understand kind of the realm of like possibilities. And we do want to consider those things, but we also have to weigh those against other considerations. So it's a constant struggle to find the right word without over committing to something that we know that isn't feasible in a plan, you know, at a later date. So it's a balance.
You saying you're not going to use shalls?
We're not going to use shalls.
Oh, come on.
I think Justin would say no.
Anything else on this one, or can we move to public transportation?
Actually, can I walk us back one? I did want to pick on climate mitigation and adaptation. So move back to, I guess. So with I know we've talked about this a whole bunch already. Explore establishing targets for transportation mode splits. And I'm just wondering, since we're continuing to see the language here of just explore establishing, can we change this perhaps to something like, you know, I mean, since we're talking about projects, right, and prioritizing projects, it's, you know, basically the project supports established targets for transportation mode splits. I mean, I want to see something that, you know, because we're going to end up adopting target mode splits. And so, you know, it's really how, when you bring that in as a policy, you know, to one of these projects, explore establishing targets, that it doesn't help a project score anything in this category. And so, you know, but a project that was improving or helping us reach or achieve targets for transportation mode splits, that's something that could actually get this box checked when in the project evaluation criteria. So I'm just wondering if we could change the language, and maybe this is a more general statement than just picking on this one policy, because I think we do want policy language to support project prioritization through the evaluation criteria. So let's think about how the language of the policies actually does that when we're evaluating transportation projects.
Staff want to
Well, I guess
respond?
I'm hoping for a little bit of clarification, because I think that establishing transportation mode splits is a very specific thing that we would be doing, and it wouldn't be on a project by project basis. It would be generally looking at mode splits across the city and developing standards around that. And the reason that we did not use establish is because what we're trying to avoid is saying that we're going to do something that we don't fully understand how that's going to impact things and how we're analyzing the system overall. And so we don't want to kind of come up with a solution to before we explore what we're trying to accomplish, and making sure that a mode split, establishing mode splits is actually valuable and useful in the way we do our analysis. And one of the things that we were hoping to, and I know we can't get into this now, but Chair Sherman, you know a lot about this. And so, I believe you do know about a lot about this. And so we're just trying to understand globally, like how Portland does this, and then how that would apply here in Milwaukee and how impactful that would be. So we would want to explore that before saying we're going to establish something.
Sure.
So that's the reason that we use that language in this policy. So that we're committed to having the dialogue. We just want to know where we're trying to get before we say we're going to do something.
And so maybe just as a clarifying question then, like, do you see that exploration being part of the TSP process, or is that like a separate project that would get worked on later?
It would be a separate project that would that gets worked on later.
Yeah, I mean, I was just even curious, and I don't know if it would, be within scope of TSP, or if there's any city staff that could even do it, of just like pulling ACS data for the last several years to just say like, what is existing conditions in terms of mode split? Like, that's a great place to start with, like, just baselining, where do we think we are?
Yeah, I pulled commute by bike when we were looking at the bike parking code recently, and I think we were somewhere between, and obviously this is just commute to work. This is not all trips, which I understand Portland's mode split targets to be more in line with, but
Which we don't have access to that kind of data.
it's, we were somewhere between 0.75%, and I think maybe 3%. And that sounds too high though, so maybe it was like 1.3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it would definitely be a bigger project to kind of undertake, and there's certainly some folks we could talk with, as well as smart folks like Kittleson and others. And then I think it also becomes a question of how do you use it,
Right.
Whether to inform policy or project choices or things like that. I do appreciate, though, Commissioner Edge, I think you've honed in on this one, but both sessions we've had, you've probably talked about it at the Transportation System Plan Advisory Committee as well. And so, yeah, I know you were going to say something, sorry.
No, that's fine. Correct me if I'm wrong, but don't we get kind of mode split targets identified for us from Metro, at least in the town center or in our Region 2040 centers?
I'm seeing a little
So
bit.
don't we already have
head
established
shaking in the room.
mode split targets, at least in parts of the city?
Yeah, I do think that is part of the transportation functional plan, regional functional plan, that they do identify mode split targets for the town center.
So, I mean, we may not have citywide mode split targets, but I realize that this particular policy is not listed as an evaluation criteria, in the bottom, but I'm thinking about all of these policies in terms of, like when we're looking at a project, how does a specific project, how would a project, address the policies? And so, in order for, and so I'd like to kind of, I'm looking for that relationship between the policies and the evaluation criteria and, something that supports and improves, upon our, achieving our most split targets where they are, established, should score points, and so I feel like, trying to figure out how to adjust that language to where we can kind of work that in as an evaluation criteria. Again, not exploring establishing, but actually helping to achieve targets where they exist.
Yeah. Well, and, another, I appreciate your mention, Commissioner Edge, about Metro and the town center mode splits, but another place that maybe we also have some information would be connecting with Peter Passarelli, thinking about the climate action plan. And we maybe, I'll put a question mark on this, like did some forecasting about, trips by bike in order to help it. No, we didn't?
I don't
okay.
believe so.
Okay.
It was really more of a city-focused plan and less about looking at
a resident's behavior.
Yeah.
That's true. It does kind of differentiate between what does the city do and what do people do. Okay, great. Well, I think maybe the point's been made on this specific one. I'd like to move us down. I think we cleared public transportation. Let's move to mobility, accessibility, and connectivity. And maybe this is a follow-up then to a little bit of what Commissioner Edge was saying about policy number 8, explore adopting a functional classification system for all modes of travel. Can you kind of talk a little bit about that? That sounds more of a policy project again, rather than an evaluatory kind of policy. That's
Do you want me to talk about it?
No.
You want that to talk about it?
Yeah, I think it was another one of those things of like, we wanted to explore it.
Okay.
But I think it sounds like we will have some sort of a classification system that's based on the performance measures that we're going to be doing. So we will be looking at bicycle and ped. So yes, continuing to think about those things moving forward.
Well, and okay, great. That's helpful. And I don't know if it fits. I don't think it fits exactly there, and maybe it fits in this goal, or maybe it doesn't. But I've had a number of conversations about bicycle safety topics in the city in the last year or more. I think one thing that I would maybe it would be included here is, I would like us to include a policy that clearly states that neighborhood greenways are given a higher functional classification than other streets, and that they should be protected from cross traffic at intersections.
We did do that, actually. It's in active, healthy transportation choices in
perfect.
7.
Look at that. Down there, the next section, number 8, it's the same number. That's lovely. Okay, thanks for doing that. Sorry, I was not reviewing as closely as I should have. So, all the red, it just was, distracted me like a bull in a china shop. Any other questions, comments on this goal?
In this same section, mobility, accessibility, connectivity, number 9, it says by slowing traffic. Can we be more clear on what we mean by slowing traffic on which roads? Do we mean on McLaughlin and 224, or is it crossing over them? If we could be more clear, I think
It's
that would be helpful.
specific to 224 McLaughlin. But okay, we can try to clarify that a little bit.
Not-
Yeah.
Yeah, on the intersecting streets, but
Yeah.
on those
Yeah.
facilities.
I mean, what about, and you can, never mind, you can wordsmith it. We don't have to help you on that.
And are those even roadways that because they're ODOT right
No,
away
but
as
we would
roads?
like to continue to be advocating
Yeah,
for
great.
doing that work. And so if we have
But
these
if we have
policies,
it
we can
here,
say
it'll-
that our
Yeah.
TSP
Our
says we want to do
community
this.
says we got to do this. Yeah. Yeah. To wordsmith it, I was going to say, put the slow traffic and the city and the streets at the front, and then say, in order to improve crossing. You were, yeah, you were there. Anything else on this section? Thanks for adding railroad facilities in here and there. Appreciate that. Although we all know working with the railroads is the easiest task in the world. Active transportation or active healthy transportation choices. Any comments or questions on this one? Again, hearing none. Thanks again. I do think you all have done a nice job incorporating feedback along the way.
I do have a quick question about so we have a policy under active healthy transportation choices number 7 to prioritize a complete connected neighborhood greenway network. Is the intent of the neighborhood, and maybe this isn't even the right place to define this, but I feel like it is because, obviously transportation system plan is the purpose of the neighborhood greenway network to serve as a primary set of routes for bicycle traffic or active transportation routes, or is it to provide a low stress alternative to more direct routes?
Or is it both? That got head shaking. I think
I don't know that we've answered that question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think, Commissioner Edge? They don't know if they've answered that question.
Yeah, I can't see anybody. I just see the presentation.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks. I feel like the neighborhood greenway network is a low stress alternative to primary routes. And not that that's an excuse to make the primary routes less comfortable or to be lower stress on, the BLTS rating. But I'm just wondering if we need to, is this document an opportunity to clarify the role of the neighborhood greenway network? And is that a clarification that the members of this body feel should be made one way or the other? Or is it just, independently of any other bicycle or pedestrian facilities in the network, we want to have a complete connected neighborhood greenway network? Is it just standalone, or is this part of complementing a larger system? And does the policy need to spell that out?
Well, I feel like that's a really interesting question. And I guess I don't know if it needs to spell it out here in this table or if that's like somewhere else in the TSP narrative. I don't know if staff have any thoughts or any other commissioners on that. I think prioritize a complete connected greenway network is a full stop sort of thing. Like we should just do that. What does complete and connected mean? That's where I think you heard me kind of ask earlier about system completeness as a measure. And maybe we should have a neighborhood greenway within a half mile or quarter mile of, large percentage of the city, which is definitely not the case today. So, I guess that's maybe a little bit of my own thoughts saying full stop, we should have a complete connected neighborhood greenway network. I do think it's an interesting point or a question you're kind of posing of that relative to bicycle facilities on, maybe, arterials, collectors and things like that. I think together those things kind of complement one another, right? And create an overall bicycle network that is, certainly more complete. So I don't know if one's not necessarily better than the other, which I think was a little bit a part of your question. But yeah, I feel like I'm rambling now, so I'll stop.
I do think having some sort of clarification or better definition of when either one is applicable is helpful, if that makes sense, where we may determine that, a BLTS on 32nd is not really all that necessary because we have an established greenway on 29th. And is there a competition there? And it seems like potentially yes. And do we want a more comfortable BLTS on 32nd? Yes, but there will be a conflict when someone says, well, I don't want to do this, or we lower the prioritization of it because there's an adjacent or within quarter mile. You know what I'm saying, right? So going down this route, I think it is really helpful. I don't know if I think I'm agreeing with you, but I think I'm just calling up. These are things where we kind of have to suss out a little bit more of. Is the neighborhood greenway a part of the toolbox to get us to a more comfortable BLTS, or is it its own thing? Again, I think I'm repeating what we've already talked about. But.
Go ahead, Ryan.
I guess I just have a question, and you may or may not know, Chair Sherman, but how does Portland think about their greenway systems? Is it primarily to move cyclists through the city, or is it, because I feel like in reality, at least in my experience, it feels like it accommodates both and serves both roles?
Yeah, I think it is kind of a both and kind of approach, which is where, as the neighborhood greenway network has been especially kind of built out much more recently, I think it is kind of the backbone of the cycling network, and then folks kind of hop off of it to make those local connections, whether, now onto the neighborhood Main Street to go a few blocks to the cafe or the grocery store or things like that. And so you also need safe facilities there as well, right? But I think that the neighborhood greenways can provide that low stress kind of like backbone across a lot of the city. And then, you want your collectors and arterials to also have safe infrastructure too. So again, someone goes to the bank, goes to the grocery store, goes to all those other places, they can get to that, they can get there. So I wouldn't say it's like the overarching policy or anything, but I think like if you've got a good greenway network, that can get you probably 80% of the way there. And then you need that last 20% to also be safe too.
Does this policy capture that for you?
I don't know if it does, because I think what Commissioner Edge was saying, or Commissioner Edge, maybe you can kind of then help answer that question that Commissioner Carpenter just asked.
Yeah, I think it is a really interesting question. It's interesting to think about, and I think that you're absolutely right. And I think that an exercise that I've been going through recently actually helps inform this. So I'm on the one of the committees I'm appointed to in Clackamas County is the Pedestrian Bikeway Advisory Committee, which is countywide, and then I'm representing that committee on the Walk Bike Plan Update Advisory Committee that the county is doing right now. So one of the things that I decided to look at, because the county wants to propose a neighborhood greenway network as well, basically, and but the geography is so different than East Portland, and so if you, I have a map, a custom map that I've kind of done some identified barriers, geographic barriers like highways, railroads, major streams like Johnson Creek and Kellogg Creek, Mount Stock Creek, things that there's relatively few, they're relatively impermeable. And Milwaukee is kind of in an island between I-205, the Willamette River, Johnson Creek, and Kellogg Creek, or Kellogg Mount Stock Creeks, where there's very few crossings, right? But there's also this kind of big expanse of relatively well interconnected grid that you don't actually see south of Kellogg Creek in the part of the county that it has jurisdiction over, just outside of Milwaukee. And so the point is that a well-connected grid of minor streets is really easy that stay off of Main Street, don't have to funnel down to Main Street to get across some geographic barrier, like a stream crossing or a rail crossing or whatever. So it makes it really easy to have kind of a spine through your city, through a large stretch of the city that isn't on a major. It doesn't require use of arterials or collectors in order to facilitate that whole long connection. I don't know. We kind of see that on Monroe. And we're building out the Monroe Greenway. And so, we're kind of doing that. And Monroe is a good alternative to King Road or King and Harrison. And so I feel like Monroe could be that for this city. Once we kind of get it, completed, all the way between the trolley trail out to into the county into I-205 multi-use path, then it would provide a lot of utility there, go the whole way through the city relatively safely. But I don't know where the other opportunities to do that are. Would it be Stanley? Would it be, you know what I mean? It's like, where are there other opportunities to do a very long, contiguous run where you don't have to jog over to make a connection on a higher stress facility to do the jog? And so that's kind of the thing that I'm running into where I'm helping the county plan for the unincorporated area to the south. But most of the city of Milwaukee is pretty flat and does have those interconnected grid opportunities to use, lower classification streets as higher classification regional bicycle routes. But how do we spell that out in the Greenway network, as a policy?
Yeah.
It's like, do we want to funnel most of that through traffic onto some key corridors that have Greenway treatments? And then, like you were saying, really provide strong, safe connections from the greenways to the business districts on something like 32nd or, King Road or, whatever. And so, I think spelling this out in a policy, I don't know that I have that spelled out. I don't even know that we're necessarily agreeing on, entirely on the role here that it should be playing. But yeah, I think this is a conversation we need to have and really spell this out. There's a lot of considerations here, but I think that, like you described, Chair Sherman, that Milwaukee probably has a good opportunity based on its interconnected grid in most of the northern and eastern parts of the city to have greenways be kind of those more heavily used biking facilities. So it's an interesting counter to what I was thinking in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I'd love to, I don't know, continue the conversation on it. Maybe as we move forward in the process, I do feel like prioritize a complete connected neighborhood greenway network for pedestrians, cyclists, and rollers maybe gets us there. I mean, I do also like the, an alternative idea that I think I threw out in the system completeness kind of conversation of just like putting a benchmark in the sand and saying, 75%, 80% of all residents will be within a quarter mile or a half mile of a neighborhood greenway. Like that would give us a very clear answer of like, are we there or not? Where are the gaps? Like then we can look at the maps and put lines down and get projects queued. And I think Commissioner Edge, the reality of some of the challenge we're facing is like Monroe is just going to be breaking ground, and which is great. Kudos to I think many councils for working on that. But our existing neighborhood greenway network, most of the greenways you wouldn't know it if you were on one right now. And I'm excited that I think engineering department and others are starting to work on that and starting to think about how we can profile neighborhood greenways more. But because I think that's an important part of people wanting to use those facilities is knowing even then they're kind of safe. So, I don't know if we'd want to go so far as like I was suggesting or questioning establishing just a goal, an overarching goal. And I don't know if that would need to happen. I mean, it probably would need to happen here in this document. I guess your question, I feel like your question or the conversation where we're at right here is like asking and answering what does a complete connected neighborhood greenway network mean? How do you know it? How do you know when you see it? And
maybe that becomes part of just the analysis that we do,
Yeah.
right?
yeah. Yeah, and maybe exactly as livable streets analysis or other things like that, you could use some of those measures that I've thrown out, and I'm sure others could come up with other ideas to kind of say, where are we at? Maybe where could we be at? And we could kind of take it up as we move forward.
Mm-hmm.
Does that sound good? Okay, great. Coordination with local, regional, and state partners. I had one here, and I don't know if it makes sense, which is the great part of a work session. So, I think as I was looking at this, we have some advocate for city priorities while coordinating city projects, policies, development actions, and mobility targets with partner agencies. I was curious about something like advocate for other agencies to use Milwaukee's standards on any right-of-way projects in the Milwaukee urban growth management area. Just knowing that, our counterparts at the county are starting to, build out some infrastructure in areas that might not be our jurisdiction today, but maybe will be within the planning horizon. And, thinking about concrete examples, our Linwood multi-use path, their Linwood multi-use path, and how those two paths experienced by one human are kind of different. And it would be great if the things that are getting built today or in the next 5 years or the next 10 years that are going to become ours in the next 10, 20 years lined up a little bit more with ours. So, I don't know if something like that would make sense as a policy, but it was a question that I had when I was looking over this.
I think you brought that up last time, Chair Sherman, and I think that we could develop a policy. I don't believe that will ever happen, that Clackamas County is going to use our standards on their roads in their jurisdictions. I just don't think that'll happen. We could ask them to.
Yeah.
We can always ask them to.
But I guess if we're putting something in a policy document to ask ODOT to slow traffic speeds down
Sure,
on
we
Highway
can ask.
224.
Yeah,
Maybe
it's a
we
fair
do something
point.
here.
Yeah, we can do that. We could add that policy.
I think it may have more relevance or more opportunity. I guess I wouldn't say relevance. It should have more opportunity for actually getting the county to partner with you on streets where a jurisdictional transfer is planned. Maybe the county does at some point plan. I mean, it's too late for Linwood, right? But just say Linwood. Just say the county's planning on. Oh, well, enough of the city is kind of built out to there. Let's just do a jurisdictional transfer. Well, okay, well, build it to our standards and then give it to us. Don't give it to us in this haphazard state, and it's kind of the same thing that
Never going to happen.
Portland has worked out with ODOT on 82nd Avenue or, other facilities. So I don't know if it warrants, putting that in there. But I agree with the idea behind the policy that we can at least ask the county, we can at least advocate on behalf of our adopted standards that that the county would use those in the UGMA, in the cities, what will theoretically eventually be annexed into the city should, ideally be done to city standards.
Yeah. I understand that they might not listen. They probably won't listen. But, I'm not knowledgeable enough on our UGMA and all of that. But, it does, to suggest we're not going to grow actually into that area, I don't know exactly what moves the city of Happy Valley made. And, and maybe Joseph Briglio could educate us all on that. But within my lifetime, I remember Happy Valley being a very small town
Right.
with
a lot of
up to
greenfields,
82nd, all the way up to 82nd, and maybe even past it in a few places. So, there's an opportunity for us there, maybe.
Just a lot of and we don't have to, it's a really complicated conversation,
Sure
right?
it
An
is,
annexation policy
Yeah.
and then deciding if a city, how you want to grow and what kind of areas you do want to take in, because you also then inherit
There's a lot
all
of
of the
liability.
infrastructure.
A lot of liabilities. Yeah,
So it's a
exactly.
really complicated conversation.
Yeah. Okay.
But we got to give the county the opportunity to say no. That's all.
Give them the opportunity to partner. I like it. Anything else on that topic? Emergency preparedness? Fiscal stewardship and system management? I circled it and wrote it down, and I know that I talked about it last time. I don't know if you had an opportunity to talk with Peter Passarelli, but maintenance impacts from utilities and other development work in the right-of-way. I see a lot, I said it last time, I'll say it again, I see a lot of, I'll spare the expletive that comes to mind, but crappy utility work where, you know, a developer, more likely a developer is, you know, putting in a new sewer line and they do a crap job. And in terms of restoring the right of way back to its kind of precondition. You know, I'm thinking like 42nd Avenue. I know a sewer cut that's right there today that's probably a quarter-inch lower and already starting to grade. And like, I know those things cost us money. And so I would love to see us, and again, maybe it doesn't, I think the last time we talked about this, I was like, maybe this isn't a TSP policy. And we just need like some like, a little bit of more utility inspections out there, but.
Fair point. You did ask that last time, and we were going to circle back with Peter, and I don't think we talked to him about it. So we will circle back with him. I don't think it is a TSP policy, but I understand your point, and I can ask Peter to explain a little bit more about how that works and what our standards are and how they get checked back in on after a project has been, and I can ask him about that.
Yeah, thanks. So, yeah, it'd be great.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
A lot of those old cuts turn into potholes. So, okay, great. Anything else from anyone else? Sorry for letting me like grind my axe on that one, or thanks for letting me grind that axe on that, everyone. Just trying to manage our system in a fiscally responsible way.
Well, nicely, Jennifer Backus said, engineering inspects those, but if they fail after the permit is final, then we have no real recourse.
Can we say they need to like be, you know, like, you know, there's a, I don't, and Jennifer probably knows exactly what it is, but I know that you do a cut, you put in your new asphalt and they put some, I'll call it tar. It's probably not actually tar, but they put down some sealant on the edges. And I've seen some of those things where that sealant fails 6 months later, a year later. Can we put maybe not in the TSP, but somewhere else in one of our standards, like that tar, whatever, not that tar that's not tar needs to last for 2 years?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
But I can circle
Great,
back.
yeah, and we don't, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, thanks again
Yep.
for humoring me on
Yeah.
that one. Economic vitality. Parking management. Thanks for adding management in. And last but not least, safe system. I think this was the one where, hi Jennifer, thanks for joining us. You were I thought you were like in the comfort of your home, just downstairs. Great, well maybe we can talk about safe system and then we can have an aside conversation about tar and no, or not. Okay, great, we'll talk about it, we've got other things. I guess I had a little bit of a question on safe system number 7, like the reframe, realize 0 traffic deaths or serious injuries on the roadway network. This sounds like it's getting us right up to like becoming a Vision Zero city without saying like become a Vision Zero city. And I know becoming a Vision Zero city means like a thing, you do a plan and you do some reporting. And I understand we're a small town. with limited staff. So is that's kind of what we're doing there?
We
I just
looked
wanted
into it.
No,
We did.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah.
No, it feels like you asked and answered the question.
Yeah, so I asked to answer the question. Well, I guess I will say thanks for tiptoeing us up to the line.
Ryan, do you
And
want to talk about a little bit about what you found? Yeah, it's just a very specific program, and there's not a lot of cities that actually do it at our size
of your
ever.
size, yeah, no, exactly, yeah.
So we were trying to get close to that without committing to something that we probably can't do.
But, I hope that, I guess I'll just say, I hope that if this stays in as it's kind of currently written, like this can become a little bit of a North Star for us. I know there's a lot of important things kind of in this document, but I think this is the kind of thing that I do think helps like organize how you approach things and think about things and consider them. So, hopefully if it stays in, we can, celebrate it, I think, as we cut the ribbon on the TSP and the mayor bangs the gavel and all that kind of stuff. Well, I think that takes us to the end of the goals and policies list. Maybe I'll just hold the floor open for a second and see if any planning commissioners have anything they want to say.
I did. I had some general comments that I just wanted to make about this. So thank you. Like Chair Sherman already said, I think you really have captured, most everything that we were talking about in the last work session. I really like what you've come forward with. Generally speaking, I know we've been nitpicking it a little bit, obviously, but this is fantastic. I think you've done a really good job of responding to our concerns and our input. So thank you for your effort behind this. I know it was no small task. The other thing that I wanted to say, no, that's a good thing.
You're supposed to leave with the bad thing first.
Is a compliment sandwich, right? So anyway, I want the goal language to be like really aspirational. I mean, the goal language is non-binding. You know what I mean? It's like, it tells a story of where we want to go and what we're trying to do as a city and as a community. And so I think that it's important. And I don't think that we did. I really hammered on this in the regular comp plan process because the kind of like for each section or each chapter of the comp plan, we have an overarching goal statement. Well, we didn't start off that way. We just had the individual goal statements and policies, and each chapter didn't really end up with an overarching goal statement until towards the very end. And we could have done a better job of making those goals more aspirational. And I'd really like to see that kind of shine through in this document. Let the goal language, just have fun with it. Just, make it truly aspirational, because again, we're not necessarily measuring ourselves towards, if we're failing reaching the goal, it's not like we get penalized or whatever. We set a goal that's too unattainable or whatever, that something bad happens if we don't get there in 20 years. So use aspirational language in the goals, and don't hedge in the goals. You know what I mean? Just go for it. And I realize we're not going to see this again before City Council does, but please put something really aspirational in front of them for the goal language. And I feel like these could easily be written in a way that is less pedestrian and more aspirational, and really just kind of shines through, and becomes more exciting. So think about how you could do that. And, I don't think you're coming back to us again with it before council sees it, but I'd really like to see that. And so, and I'll just repeat my compliment from earlier, since I don't have another one. Those were the only two things I wanted to say. So really good job. I really appreciate what you guys brought to us today.
Well, and I thank you very much, Commissioner Edge, for complimenting us on our work. Yeah, we did spend a lot of time with us. And then I will also say that I don't know that we'll be spending a lot more time on the goals, quite honestly. This would have been that moment to get some language from this group, I think, because these are the goals as they have been presented and have gone through the advisory committee and the technical committee. So I would recommend that if you do have specific language to make them more inspirational, aspirational, that we probably would need to have that language from you all before kind of going off and making new goal statements that haven't been vetted by anyone before we go to council. So and thank you again for all of your compliments on the work that we did. That was my sandwich. Did you appreciate
That
it?
was my sandwich.
I just want to be honest and set the stage
Yeah.
properly. And so there's not an expectation that we're not meeting. And so if we need to do work on the goals, then that's something that we need to do with you all.
Yeah. Well, thanks. I appreciate that. And if there's maybe any friendly amendments that folks have, we could talk about that. We could also move into livable streets and then circle back if any, brilliant ideas come along the way. It's an interesting, I do appreciate your comment there. I'm thinking about some marketing folks I work with that are always like, zhazh it up. And it's just like, yeah, is there an opportunity there? And I don't know what things are off the top of my head, but even looking at the climate mitigation and adaptation, create a transportation system that reduces greenhouse gas pollution and is responsive to a changing climate. Part of my mind goes to like, reduces greenhouse gas pollution by how much?
Well, that's not right. We're getting into the details of that later by how much, or maybe that not specific detail, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So,
And don't get me wrong, that's obviously that was a change, and it was improved upon. And this is better, more aspirational language, and so anyway, if I come up with any, I'm not a marketing guy like that. So, but if I come up with any ideas, then before the end of the meeting, then I'll try to circle it back around to it. But I think it obviously would be more productive for us to just move forward.
yeah, that sounds good. And maybe you can let City Council know that Commissioner Edge reserves the right to, jazz it up a little bit. So, as we move forward in the process. Great. Well, how do folks feel about like 5-minute break? Let's do a quick 5-minute break. So it's just turned to 8:37. Let's get back on at 8:42, grab some water. We'll see you then. Thanks. We're in recess. Great, we're back from our recess. Welcome back to the work session on the Transportation System Plan policies and goals and policies. I keep putting it in the reverse order. I think we're handing it back to staff and the consultant team to talk about the livable streets analysis.
Ryan's going to pull up a PowerPoint presentation for us.
Great.
Ryan's going to pull up a PowerPoint presentation for us.
I don't know where you want to.
Take it away? Yeah, okay. Okay, so we kind of produced this memo in parallel with the performance measures memo. At least it was presented to our two committees as a packaged set of documents. But they're different things. So the livable streets analysis by scope and sort of defined set of tasks in our scope was, I think, originally envisioned to just be a review of Milwaukee's current design standards, street design standards. And when I say street, it's travelway, I should say, standards for applicability to modern best practices, and more particularly the livable streets guidelines. And it kind of morphed into an audit of your TSP and your public works standards to see how well those two documents line up with the concept of livable streets and what potential changes are needed to, as part of this new TSP, reflect those concepts and ideals. So let me go to the next slide. I'll talk a little bit about, just in general, this is an extracted image from Metro's Livable Streets Design Standards document. And, if you just look at the pure definition of a livable street, right, what is it focusing on? Well, it's focusing first and foremost on flexibility. So we want to move away, in the profession and most communities want to move away from rigid design standards, right, that aren't flexible to the unique land use characteristics. What might be appropriate in, a commercial zone or an industrial zone is not going to be appropriate in a more residential zone. Sometimes those standards don't take that land use consideration or that land use context into consideration. Now, the good news is a lot of communities have realized this many years ago, some cases decades ago, and this is not a situation where we're starting on the back edge of that curve. We, as Milwaukee and a lot of communities in Metro, have already been doing this for many years, in some cases decades. But there's always holes. And so this livable streets analysis ended up being an audit to determine where we might find some of those holes and where we can focus some of our planning efforts going forward. So going back to that image, I think when you look at livable streets, it's safe and comfortable places for people of all ages and abilities. Designing and encouraging slower travel speeds where appropriate. Welcoming spaces for people of all backgrounds. That's kind of that equity element that comes into play. Places to interact and linger. It's not just about getting from A to B in some cases. Designing to foster a sense of community, ownership, and responsibility. Designing to protect the environment. I think the environment piece is the key word there. Able to adapt to new mobility technologies. That's going to be a challenge for us going forward as we move forward into electrification and the other elements associated with it. And lastly, resilient to changing climates and the impacts of weather events. Those are all kind of the rudimentary concepts of what a livable street should be. So with those elements in mind, we went through and just did a kind of an audit, if you will, of your existing TSP and your your public works standards. So we all know what the existing TSP is. If you're less familiar with your public works standards, that's where Jen and her colleagues come into play. Those are the rigid standards. In some cases, rigid is not the right word, but those are the standards that that city engineering staff uses when they're designing and assessing the designs of others when it comes to the local transportation system and the water system and the sewer system and all the other civil engineering elements that go into it. So next slide, Ryan. So starting with the Milwaukee TSP, we went through this process. So the map on the left is your functional classification system, your currently adopted functional classification system, and it has all the typical bells and whistles of it. It identifies where your arterials are, your collectors, and your local streets. The image on the right is extracted from the TSP, and it is a representation, a sort of a cross-section representation of what the ideal elements are for those functional classification definitions. And where your existing TSP is getting it right is it doesn't identify the specifics of those characteristics. In other words, it doesn't say your street shall be 12 feet and travel lane should be 12 feet. It doesn't say your bicycle lane should be 6 feet. It doesn't say your green zone should be X number of feet, but it does identify that these are the features that in an ideal start from the scratch environment you'd love to see on most facilities. Now, it also does a great job of, if you see those little asterisks under each of the symbols there, those basically say, these are ideal, but they're not required, right? So that's that flexibility piece that your current TSP is doing a great job of. So I think the big finding from your TSP is you already have, two of the really key fundamental elements of a livable street. So that is flexibility and non-specificity. You want your specificity not be in your TSP. You want those to be in your public works standards. So I think that was one of the big findings when we looked at the TSP is you've already got a great start, and it's going to make this new TSP that much easier. I pulled this one out in the original presentation to our committees because it does show some of those details. So for example, at your local and neighborhood street level, it defines the travelway as kind of a mixed travel zone. Right? It recognizes that at the local street level, you don't typically need bicycle lanes and separated facilities because your volumes are typically at levels where those can be mixed. But it does say, hey, you know what, you probably do need parking zones, mostly, but it doesn't say you need them exclusively, right? So you could go down to just a portion of that mixed travel zone in some situations and not miss a beat. As long as you've got sidewalks and a pedestrian accommodation, at least on one side of the street. So there's that flexibility piece. Now, is that appropriate for every local street in the city? Nope. But you at least have that flexibility built in here. So that's one of the key important findings from this audit. I've already kind of stated this one, but there's also some things in here that we probably ought to take a closer look at. Now, we've talked a lot about neighborhood greenways tonight. There's also some other treatments that our committees presented to us when we met with them. So I think that as we move forward into this TSP, as part of this audit, we recognize that we need to spend a little bit more time in the TSP and be a little more purposeful with how we describe and how we define and how we identify some of these other elements, such as neighborhood greenways. So next slide. So let's start with that, neighborhood greenways. So in very simple terms, your adopted TSP includes the following menu of options for greenway treatments. I think this is great language from a policy level. It's not saying you have to, but these are the ideal things. You'd like to see signage. You'd like to see pavement markings where appropriate, intersection treatments where needed, traffic calming where needed, and traffic diversion where needed, right? Those are all the key elements of neighborhood greenways. Check, check, and check. You already have them in your TSP. For the most part, I think they're all very appropriate, and I wouldn't suggest or recommend changing those. Next slide. I'm sorry, go back. So one of the things that I don't have a slide about, but we did notice is the neighborhood greenways are identified as, in theory, kind of overlay treatments, right? They're not functional classification standards, or they're not separate functional classifications of facilities, right? And that was probably by design. they recognize that you can have a neighborhood greenway on a local street at the same time you have one on a collector. It's what you do with that local street and what you do with that collector to differentiate it as a neighborhood greenway, that's important. But I think what the neighborhood greenway language in your TSP does focus on more than anything, and this goes back to some of those policy statements and we were grappling with earlier, is it more or less identifies it as a bicycle-focused improvement. They do focus that language mostly on bicycle combinations. Doesn't differentiate to a great level of detail why you would maybe identify a neighborhood greenway when at the pedestrian level. It's in your bicycle chapter. The overlay is in your bicycle map, facilities map. So it is very bicycle oriented. And if you wanted that neighborhood greenway designation to be more multimodal and not just about bicyclists, then those are some modifications we're going to have to think through. So, next slide. So what are some of those other design concepts? So neighborhood greenways, a little bit more of an overlay. I think there's some other concepts like Wooners. Wooners, I got to remember to enunciate that correctly. If you're not familiar with that term, it's Dutch, and it kind of identifies a little bit more of an overlay standard, again, where you blend the pedestrian environment with the vehicular environment, and you use, it's a curbless environment in some ways. The plantings and the furnishing zones are at street grade in order to encourage slower travel speeds. It's really a mixed use environment. It's not appropriate in every situation. There's certainly some areas where, and Milwaukee doesn't have any of these at the moment, but maybe there's some opportunity to explore and envision those going forward. So as a design concept, if you don't have a policy statement in your TSP, it's very hard to encourage private properties and private development to move forward with a treatment if you can't support it at the policy level. So that's an image. This is from Sherwood of maybe what it might look like in the real world. As you can see that parking zone and that street zone and that ped zone are all just sort of merged together. It's pavement treatments and brick treatments and other stamping and other things that kind of differentiates those different zones from each other, but very low speed, very low volume, very intermixed travel. Okay, so that was your TSP. There's some other nuances there. It's a lot more detail in the actual livable streets analysis. We then moved into your public works standards, tried to look at it from the same perspective. So in contrast to those nice, pretty, colorful documents you get in your TSP, your public works standards, a little bit more like engineering manuals, if you can tell. And that's what it is in some way, shape, or form. So this is where you have the specificity where you need it. Now, the cross-section here, I think, borrows heavily from the TSP in the sense that it uses the asterisk and it uses the flexibility element. Now, there's an accompanying table and a bunch of accompanying narrative that is intermixed within in the paragraphs of your public works standards that gets to, okay, at a minimum, you're at the collector level, you're not going to have anything less than a 22-foot travelway. TSP doesn't say 22 feet, it just says it has to be of a particular width. This is where you get down to that specificity, but it smartly, and it's working well for the city, I believe, that it provides ranges, right? And that's the key term here, is you don't always need a 20-foot street. Sometimes you need a 22-foot street, and sometimes you need a 24-foot street. So it provides some flexibility in that regard. And that's good. And that's, again, moving into that principle of livable streets is you definitely you want to get away from rigidity, you want to get into flexibility. Next slide. Also, I think we looked at a little bit more closely of what are some of the industry best practices when it comes to widths for clear zones and pedestrian zones and green zones and parking zones and mixed travel zones. And at that audit level, your public works standards are fit nicely within the accepted ranges of dimensional standards for these different zones. So in other words, you're not pushing forward 4-foot sidewalks when you should be pushing 6-foot sidewalks, right? Your 6-foot sidewalk minimum standard or 5-foot in certain areas fits nicely within the industry practices and the ranges of standards that industry have found to be reasonable and appropriate for most settings. So the big takeaways is no major changes are needed to ensure, a really good livable street compatibility. There are some minor design standard table adjustments for clarity, I think we found, and that's the kind of stuff we would tackle at the very end of this TSP. And lastly, your standards allow for flexibility, but they don't currently visualize a range of design treatments appropriate for some city streets. So that was where this next section comes into play. So if you like looking at good pictures and things, now we got some less text-heavy slides for you. So this is just an idea more than it is an actual recommendation. But we recognize through conversations with Jen and her staff and Laura and her staff that sometimes it is appropriate to have some visual representations of various treatments for the sake of understanding what it means for the design level and communicating those ideas to the development community and to help sort of flesh out, what it means to identify certain accommodations on different roadways. So we put together with a lot of Jen's help these cross sections here that kind of visualize the range of treatments that city staff is currently using on their streets or actively currently designing as part of current design projects. So I will just quickly cycle through these. So get ready, Ryan. But just a kind of a local and improved neighborhood street standard that's kind of recognized that you have a lot of these streets where you don't have sidewalks and you're more than likely never to need them, just given the configuration, the topography, the land use, and the volumes on the streets. So we want to at least have some sort of recognition of that. And that's what this is showing. Or curb and gutter, right, yeah. So local neighborhood streets, these are just a couple of different pictures of kind of what it looks like. We recognize that not every street needs sidewalks on both sides. Maybe you don't have the ability to get sidewalks on both sides. So if you can focus it at least on one side, it at least needs to be of a particular width. And ideally, you'd like to have some kind of a buffer between that sidewalk and the travelway. This might be one option. And this is, I think, is it Harvey? That's now it doesn't look like this in reality, but this is kind of the design treatment that Jen and Jen are working on, and what Harvey will ultimately look like when it's completed in some way, shape, or form. Other scenarios right now, let's put sidewalks on both sides, right, where we can. But again, we want to at least have those buffering zones and recognize that we ought to apply those when we have the ability to. Now, the image below was a scenario where that design treatment was realized, but we didn't have the extra width for the buffer. But ideally, the buffer is there when you can get it, but it's not always needed when you can't. So, also different variation on this where maybe we just have a shoulder, some kind of a shoulder treatment on one side with a swale on the other. Different types of treatments are appropriate in different areas. So just another one of those design options that city staff is currently considering in other locations. We moved this beyond local streets to the collector street level simply because I think in places like Milwaukee, it's very hard to distinguish a local street and a collector street sometime. So we at least ought to go up to the collector street level to see what we can come up with. Here's an option where, and you'll recognize this, the multi-use path on one side of the street, but also recognize that maybe there's a need at the collector level for some on-street parking at the same time. So just another variation of some cross-section ideas. Here's the one recently constructed, this is, help me out here, is this Lake Road? Yep. Not recently constructed and not constructed to the image you see above, but in the heart of kind of what this is getting at is, a sidewalk with a buffer, a buffered bike lane, and then the 2 travel lanes. I think this is one example of kind of the aspirational level of design we would want to see for this type of facility. This design is actually implemented, as you can see in the image down below. So you got a multi-use path on one side of the street, bicyclists and pedestrians with a buffered sort of green zone separating that pathway, and then you got a curb-tight sidewalk on one side of the street. Talking earlier, about what does visualizing, what is a BLTS 1 or 2? This is probably a scenario where you're going to get BLTS and PLTS 1 and 2s, given what you see here. So this is a great example of where we can show different types of design treatments, bumping up or bumping to a higher degree the pedestrian level of traffic stress or bicycle level of traffic stress. And then just another version of what's already been constructed with this multi-use pathway on both sides. So none of this is novel, but I think it was important to ensure that at the TSP level that we visualize some of these ranges of treatments. And not to say that there couldn't be 6 or 7 variations of every one of these, but I think this represents the range of treatments that city staff is comfortable with and recognizes as the potential given the constraints that they routinely work with when designing new roadways. So.
Great, thanks so much. Maybe we can open up for comments, question, discussion. I think and since we kind of closed on those cross sections, a question that I had is, with these as kind of sample cross sections, if you will, how does the asterisk, I don't even know what the plural for asterisks or something like that, on all the other public works standards, like how does that play with, you look at those cross sections and there's measurements laid out and things like that. So that was kind of a question that I kind of had. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I think another thing I was kind of wondering on some of those cross sections, appreciate the design work that's already gone into them. So I apologize for nitpicking, but it'd be nice to have a tree in at least 1 or 2 of those. Because picture tells a thousand words, and there was no trees there. So I think those were, and then I had a few other things, but maybe we can just start with that one around the visual sample versus the standards and the flexibility there.
Yeah. So well, 2 things that I think you'll be pleasantly or surprised and pleasantly surprised to learn. Those design dimensions that we put on there, probably couldn't read them, but they all have ranges associated with them, right? So it's not 12, it's 12 to 20 or whatever the numbers were. It's not 4 feet, it's 5 to 6, right? So it's recognizing, and any future refinements of those graphics, and there will be some, will be more reflective of those ranges rather than the specifics. But those asterisk treatments that we use in those other cross sections, I think those are going to remain, right? It's to recognize that we don't always need or will have or can expect to have every one of these treatments, but aspirationally visualizing what they could look like is the purpose more than anything. With regards to the trees, we actually have worked on refinement to all of those cross sections. We've got some urban context that we've added to the outer edges of the development zone. So you can see some residential context and some urban context where appropriate. So we'll be adding those back in. That was just a quick and dirty exercise to get the document completed, but it wasn't the final version of any of those things.
Nice. Well, look forward to seeing those as the process kind of continues to move forward. I guess a few other things before maybe opening it up on the kind of the cross sections that kind of got me thinking is, and maybe related to one of the topics earlier that Commissioner Edge brought up around multi-use path widths. And do we want to be thinking about what a width or a width range should be on a multi-use path, especially as, some people use multi-use paths for walking, strolling leisurely, and other people want to use those for their class 3 e-bike rolling at 25 miles an hour. I know this is an active conversation where I work and we don't have an answer, but I think just kind of wanting to flag that. Another kind of question or comment, and something I kind of brought up totally unrelated to Laura recently, about, fortunately or unfortunately, we can make some great pedestrian improvements, trying to go for the PLTS of 1, or some great bike improvements, and then we end up still with mailboxes in the middle of the darn sidewalk. And that, to me, I think is a problem. And like, you know, there's big problems in the world we can't solve. This seems like the kind of one that we probably can solve, maybe not. So maybe we can tell the Postal Service we want to change things up here in the city of Milwaukee. So I'd love to kind of hear thoughts on either of those topics about multi-use path width as well as mailbox location. For anyone who dares go to those dangerous topics.
Go for it, Jennifer. We can talk about the post office a little bit.
Okay. So with mailboxes, we identified a lot of those issues when we were doing the ADA transition plan initially. We, inventoried all the sidewalks throughout the city. And so one of the things we highlighted was barriers. So that can be mailboxes, that can be power poles, that can be hydrants. There's a lot of different things that can have down wires from PGE. Lots of those get identified. They're obviously costly to move, and you have to work with different agencies to get them moved. You have to work with the post office. There's limitations on where things can go. But we have identified a lot of those, so we are in the process of anytime we are upgrading stuff to try to get things relocated and moved. That's not to say that someone won't put a mailbox back somewhere else later, and then we kind of have to fight with the post office again. But at least when we are redoing sidewalks in these portions, that's one of the things we look at to try to relocate stuff, so.
Okay. I'd like us to try harder. And
Agreed.
I don't know how we do that, but 42nd Avenue, repaved, mailbox is basically right back in the same spot. Harvey is getting upgraded, and when I went to the Harvey open house, mailboxes are gonna be right back in there, and here we are putting a sidewalk in, and how are you gonna ride your bike down with your kid down that sidewalk, or the person in the wheelchair on that sidewalk, and you got all these darn mailboxes, so, and the utilities, we can tell them to move their poles as well. It's just a matter of will, so.
Utilities, we have a little bit of an easier time being able to work out arrangements with them, but yeah, the post office kind of gets to final say where they want their mailboxes, so I would like to see a better partnership there too.
Can't we write an ordinance just saying we're not gonna have mailboxes in the,
I think that touches something federal, I'm not sure.
really?
It's a whole thing with the post office.
I mean, I believe that it might be, but there feels like there has to be a way to undo where a mailbox is. Just because the mailbox was put there in 1920 doesn't mean it should forever be there for infinite time moving forward. Things change. I don't know.
We have ADA guidelines now, they should move.
Yeah,
It's codified in federal code, right, for where mailboxes can be.
yeah.
So
It's a little
that
tricky.
trumps our,
Unfortunately, it's very tricky.
Okay,
I don't know.
all right.
You
Well,
wouldn't think it would be, but it is.
okay, well, so those are two other things. Mailboxes are tough. Maybe we can get PG to move some poles. I think so multi-use path widths, have we thought, what are we thinking there for TSP?
I know we've been looking at different options for it, because
Okay.
like you said, there are people that want to just use it as their cycle racing practice track, and that's great to see it used, but yeah, maybe people that just want to go for a leisurely stroll don't really love that. Linwood paths are pretty wide.
Yeah.
And I think those actually have some pretty dedicated split lanes too in sections, which I think have worked pretty well that I've seen. But like Matt was saying earlier, we've kind of kept things to a range, so it kind of just wherever the place calls for it. If it's expected to be a big bike area, we may want to make sure it's a little bit wider. So it's just going to be dependent on the location.
Okay.
Dependent on the right of way that we have
Yeah.
available, right?
Yeah,
Well,
That's the
I
biggest
mean,
piece,
yeah,
obviously.
clearly that's one of the first
That's the
constraints you're
biggest.
working with, yeah. I saw Commissioner Edge first, and then I think Commissioner Carpenter with Blinky Mike. That was a cool move. Commissioner Edge.
Thank you, Chair. So with respect to the post office, what I was wondering, I wasn't going to comment on this, but I'm kind of wondering, how do we get it to where they can deliver on foot? Because there's neighborhoods in Portland where, they're walking door to door, and there are enough addresses along the route to justify having, someone be able to walk that neighborhood rather than drive it. So I'm just wondering what's the ticket there? Do we need to designate certain things as like a certain kind of pedestrian route or a pedestrian corridor or some kind of some kind of a classification for the road or the street where the pedestrian facility is in order to, maybe have some ability to negotiate, a foot delivery and on-foot delivery instead of vehicular-based delivery. So, maybe if there's something that we could explore with that, since there are neighborhoods that get, on-foot postal delivery, what do we need to do to make that work out? I realize you're not going to answer that tonight, but that's just, kind of planting the seed if you want to pursue that. I think regional multi-use paths have to be 15 feet wide. I think that's right. But obviously our local ones, can be smaller, and our pedestrian zone here is marked as 5 to 10 feet as the current range. And so, I don't know that we're going to get 15 feet on, in rights of way. Those regional trails that are wider, tend to be in like an old railroad right of way, so plenty of room to work with to get 15 feet of paved trail. I guess, so those are just my two thoughts on the things that you were just commenting on, Tara Sherman. I guess I wanted to see, and I asked for this at the last work session, I wanted to see arterials and cross-section for arterials. And in particular, looking at Harmony, out to the CCC campus, which is in the regional center, designated a regional street in the Metro 2040, Region 2040 plan. And so kind of has some, a regional design for a cross-section, that's kind of anticipated for a facility like that. So I was hoping to see some response to that in tonight's discussion and materials. I'm looking at our city's road jurisdiction map, and the stretch of Harmony I'm talking about was annexed into the city and is shown as being in city jurisdiction. It's the stretch from the Railroad Linwood intersection with Harmony to out to the city limits at about 80th, the edge of the CCC Harmony campus. The eastern edge. So I was hoping to see cross-section plans for a facility like that. And we don't have those in the materials tonight. So I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, or if we just talk about that later when it's, however you want to address that is fine, but I was hoping to hear more about arterials and that kind of facility tonight. I also don't know what the functional classification is for Harmony in that stretch that was annexed. So I don't know if that's something that you can answer as well. I assume it's an arterial, but I guess I don't know. None of the maps that show the functional classifications are updated to show that it's in the city yet.
Yeah, we haven't gotten to making those maps, updating those maps yet, Commissioner Edge. And so I apologize, we haven't done that yet as part of this. And we can bring that back to you at another meeting to talk through that a little bit.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I'd like to see if assuming Harmony there is an arterial, I would just be interested in seeing what cross sections that we're proposing for facilities like that.
Okay, we can bring that back to you.
Commissioner Carpenter, I know you had a question earlier. Or comment.
Regarding, multi-use paths, and trying to figure out widths and safety with fast cyclists versus not as fast. Again, I know these are cross sections, but would there be a possibility of a standard signage that just helps people know, like, if you're going to go at the same speed as a car, maybe be in the roadway instead of, that's just one thought.
Yeah.
Another thought is pairing a multi-use path with a bike lane adjacent so that people who want to go fast aren't in the same space as strollers. So if there's a cross-section, that could include that as well. Just a thought. And then, I don't know if this is the right spot, but are we going to have any sort of traffic calming standards? Cross-section details, all that? Do those exist already, or we're going to talk about that later?
Don't believe we have any just like specific traffic calming details. We have several traffic calming measures identified that we can apply, like treatments specifically that we could apply as needed, you know, whether those are chicanes, bulb outs, there's a couple others as well, speed bumps, which pretty low on the list that we try to do usually. So we have a couple that we look at depending on what the actual volume is, what the speed is, what the need is of the street as well. So we could look into putting some into the details eventually.
Yeah, I know in the existing TSP, I think some of those kind of treatments are in there. I don't know if they're going to get like refreshed.
Yep.
Okay.
There, it's kind of the toolbox, right?
Great.
What have we got in our
Okay,
toolbox and
great.
taking a look at those
Just
treatments?
because I know
Yeah.
there's a lot of like new tools as well,
Yeah.
right? And since the TSP was kind of last adopted, so yeah, that would be
we'll
great.
definitely include those.
Yeah. Another kind of comment that I have around the street cross sections that I was starting to wonder is, I really liked seeing the Wooneriff, but I was also wondering, what about like a pedestrian plaza, right? Where you maybe close down a cross section for a block to open it up for other uses entirely, you know, not to suggest anyone wants to do it, but you could envision the possibility of some blocks of downtown kind of closed off at one end and opening the whole thing up. And, you know, I'm looking at the New York City DOT, and of course, New York City's a, you know, much larger jurisdiction than we are, but, you know, some of the, in their street design manual, they have some stuff around pedestrian plazas, and I'm sure others do as well. And it just seems like it would be an interesting thing to kind of include to help us maybe fully realize the livable streets kind of idea.
A similar terminology would be like a festival street where you can easily place bollards, you know, close the street down temporarily and have a similar
Soho.
effect.
We have one. We have it in
Yeah.
Soho. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the name of that plaza?
It's the Soto Plaza, so it's right by the post office.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's got bollards that can come up or down so we can actually close off the street, but the post office is still able to get access so that we don't block deliveries on
We
the
have
back end of it.
bollards there?
Yeah.
We really do? Why don't we use those?
It has not been used very much. We would love to see it used more, so.
I think that's one of my favorite things, and we'll get to you in just a second, Commissioner Edge, of like going to other countries and seeing like automated bollards, like allowing commerce to still happen, but like people to kind of really flourish and take over
I don't
streets.
think ours are automated. I think they
Okay.
are manually
They're
brought
manual.
up, but.
Still, that's, I mean,
Still there.
still some improvement. Commissioner Edge, your hand's up.
Yeah, I was going to leave it alone that you brought it up. So, I support this. I want to see some, I mean, more than just a festival. I mean, I guess Festival Street is probably it, but, some way of having, a pedestrian plaza or pedestrian district, something a little grander than just, a single block of Festival Street. But this kind of plays into, I mean, something I've alluded to a little bit, which is, and we've seen some references to, I think, so far, which is having different functional classifications for the different modes. And so if you had like, effectively like a pedestrian arterial, or a pedestrian way, and that's functional classification is an arterial, then, but it's on a local service street for general purpose traffic or whatever, then, maybe, maybe there's different treatments or something that would go into the cross section to really make that a much more comfortable pedestrian experience, than just, kind of sidewalks and a buffer, green zone buffer or whatever. But maybe it's gets even wider sidewalks or more of a buffer, or maybe we use kind of a narrower pavement with advisory bicycle lanes and a wider sidewalk on one side or something to that effect. So we can play around with the cross section a little bit more and maybe encourage or even remove the asterisks in some cases for certain types of classifications, or depending on the modal classification, or the combination of modal classifications on a specific facility might remove some of the asterisks on some of those cross-section designs. So that's the kind of thing that I was thinking about. It's like, how do we use policy to really encourage a specific kind of outcome rather than kind of leaving it up to engineering discretion in all cases.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, especially because, I could see some kind of use cases where you might not want the street functional classification to like make the choice on the sidewalk width or to present that. And, I guess something that's coming to mind is thinking about neighborhood hubs, for example, of like where a neighborhood hub is, like given how we're trying to kind of orient more towards something that's walkable, bikeable, like should a minimum 6 feet sidewalk be okay? Or should it be 8? And I don't know, but like having maybe a little bit, and maybe the flexibility is there, but I think sending that stronger policy direction to the engineering staff and the others that are like making those choices, I think is what I am hearing you suggest, Commissioner Edge.
Yeah, that's correct. I think that in some cases we may want, and in particular, I'm thinking of like some of the discussion around the 29th Avenue Greenway that we had recently, not at the Planning Commission, but at the City Council, where they're, basically because of the functional classification of the roadways that were involved, we weren't using certain traffic control signage, on cross streets of the Greenway, in order to, because the engineers decided that, the warrants weren't there, right? And so rather than relying on that kind of typical procedure, in the case of something where a street like 29th is, say, classified, has a functional classification of, major bikeway or, neighborhood greenway or, whatever it ends up being is a verbiage and policy, guide or, what we adopt, that the policy would win. The policy would dictate that those cross streets, even if there aren't warrants for stop signs, would get stop signs. Just as an example.
Yeah. Yeah, and thinking about that from both a bicycle and a pedestrian perspective in terms of like prioritizing, creating some prioritization there. Yeah, it's an interesting idea. Commissioner Carpenter, you look ready to unmute. No, holding.
I've lost it.
Any other? I think I would support. I think some thought on some additional prioritization. I think it could be useful. I want to make I think we'd want to make sure we're not over revving and something you all have something that's feasible and still somewhat easy to kind of review. Any other kind of thoughts or questions? Or go ahead. Yeah.
This gets way into the weeds and closer to the development application side, but when are these asterisks cleared up and when are the ranges solidified in terms of when a developer needs to know how much right-of-way may be dedicated or required?
So we tend to look at what the existing right-of-way is and then what the neighboring improvements already are, and then what, whether there's any connectivity wishes for that area. And then also just what we looking at all the pieces, what are the priorities here? Like, okay, we know we need to get a multi-use path in here, so that's going to take up at least this much space, ideally this much space. We have kind of a range we want to go for there. We know we need stormwater treatment, just because we have to have it in some form. So we need at least this much space, ideally this much. Then we just start kind of chipping away and seeing what we have. Can we fit parking in? Is that worth fitting in? So then we have to kind of just prioritize that way. So it's kind of every single one we get look at specifically. And then as far as dedication goes from there, once we see what we really want, is it proportional to what the development is to ask for that much? And then if not, okay, where can we cut it back to convince ourselves that we can get this much right away instead? So if it's a huge development, obviously we can ask for a little bit more dedication. If it's a duplex, we can't ask for that much dedication, so.
Great. Thanks for the explanation there. You know, I don't know if there's anything else. One thing I wanted to pivot to is neighborhood greenways, and I appreciate kind of some recommended performance guidelines. Vehicle speeds no more than 20 miles an hour, target volume of 1,000 motor vehicles a day or less, can function at 1,500 vehicles per day. And I think that does a great job kind of establishing like what we want to see. I did want to also note though, because I maybe spent way too much time looking at things like this before, that you know, the example of how this would align with the city of Portland. The city of Portland also has a fourth measure, performance measure that says over 2,000 vehicle trips per average vehicle per trips per day triggers a change. And so that is, you know, I think to Commissioner Edge's point, the point at which the city engineers say, now we have to do something to make sure that this street functions as the kind of street segment or classification that we want it to be. And I think I'd really like to see something like that as well, because, you know, personally, I worry, you know, I think both 42nd and Harvey are on the neighborhood greenway lists, and those aren't BLT1 facilities. As someone who has the fourth grader, I'm not going to ride my bike down those with, you know, the only time I rode my bike down those streets with my kids was when I was with 30 other cyclists, and we took the whole lane. But, you know, I think that I don't know where those facilities are in terms of their ADT, but you know, and they might not even hit that trigger. But I think us making a commitment that if something gets out of control, we're gonna rein it in, I think is really important. So we would really like to see some language there in terms of adding in kind of the a little bit of a stick or an accountability measure for ourselves.
I'll agree with that, particularly because diversion can be achieved, you know, pretty cost effectively.
Yeah. Does that take us through livable streets for now?
For now, yeah.
For now? Next bite of the apple in August. Great. Well, thanks so much for joining. Thanks as well. I think we're in a pretty good spot here. Appreciate all the work that's gone into this. You know, I know, Ryan, the edits that you've made, the committee work, the Transportation System Plan Advisory Committee, you all have been staffing to kind of get to this point. So I think we're in a really good spot. Look forward to hearing what City Council has to say, but really just want to say kudos to everyone who's been kind of involved. This is a, you know, big process for the planning department. So I think it's headed in the right direction. Look forward to kind of seeing the next version. And yeah, Mike, I'll hand it over to you to like close us out.
I don't want to close, but I do want to say, because I don't think city staff gets enough recognition. They've been extremely patient with myself and my team as we are exploring this new form of TSP. And we've hit some bumps in the roads, some self-imposed, some just due to the newness of this whole process. But I hope you recognize, and I'd like everyone to know that I really appreciate your staff and how they've helped us kind of push this along, and not not got us in too much trouble.
Yeah, but it's not easy being first in the state, right? So y'all are doing a great job. And yeah, definitely kudos to the staff team on this as well. So great. Well, I think that then takes us through our work session item. And we can move on to Planning Commission, other business updates. I had a topic that Commissioner Edge has one. I've got a topic that I wanted to talk about. So, the Planning Commission is a living, breathing organism. We have people come, we have people go. I'd say we're in a little bit of a moment where I think we have more people coming than people going. And wanted to kind of float the idea and see where folks would be at of maybe trying to have either on cycle using one of our existing Planning Commission meetings that maybe hasn't been scheduled out yet, or scheduling an off cycle, maybe just an in-person, if possible, meetup where, we could all sit down together. We could sit down with Laura, we could sit down with Justin, we'd have a quorum, so it would be a public meeting. We wouldn't be doing any decision-making, but we could just talk through a little bit of the process of the different kinds of things that come to us as a body. We have kind of type 5 legislative things like we're working on right now, working on it in work session, which is different from like working on it in a hearing. And then of course, we have our quasi-judicial components, our type 3 applications and master plans and other things like that. I was just thinking it might be useful to, again, if possible, get together physically, talk through some of that, hear people's questions, I know that Commissioner Edge has been someone who I feel like has helped school me, especially when I was a fresh, young planning commissioner. And I just think it would be useful to have a moment where we could kind of do some of that knowledge exchange. So wanted to just kind of see maybe broadly if folks would find that valuable. And then if so, maybe we can move into the trying to schedule it, do we schedule it on an existing Planning Commission night? And then also the question of like, could we actually pull it off all in person together, or do we need a hybrid option, which I'm totally fine with as well, but was just thinking in person could be helpful. So let's maybe start with, would that be valuable? And I'd love to just kind of hear folks' thoughts.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I think that'd be helpful.
Yes.
Okay, great. So it would be valuable, which I appreciate.
I have to say that it would require a lot of coordination on my side.
Yeah. Well, and I think so. Let's move into maybe that next question. Let's skip the new existing meeting or new meeting, or like, and by new meeting I mean like not on a whatever day of the week it is, a Tuesday, like we try and, put a doodle together and try and find another night, which might be hard, honestly, over the next few months. But let's go to the other question I had about, could we do it in person or should we just plan for it to be hybrid? And again, flexible on my end.
Any public meeting should plan to be hybrid.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Yeah. So I think we could plan to have it hybrid, and then we could just schedule for in-person for whoever could attend. Okay, that sounds good. So let's maybe go to the question of like on meeting cycle or off meeting cycle. And Laura, I know you have a calendar, so.
I do have a calendar.
We have a blank date in late July.
We do. We
Wow,
have
in July.
I think, Ernestina's out. I know Justin is out in late July, and
Yeah.
I think wanting to have the city attorney there just to answer anybody's questions, especially, as we might have more quasi-judicial things coming through. I think having that opportunity to like ask Justin the hypothetical question about a not to be named development that maybe we've already seen or things like that could be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Justin's not available on the 23rd. I think that there could be potential to have it probably not on August 13th, but potentially on August 27th. We've got a work session scheduled that night. We could probably, get through that. It's a natural resources work session, the work that Brett's doing with the natural resources code. September 10th, we've got the annual joint meeting with the NDAs tentatively scheduled, so we probably wouldn't want to do it that night. And then the next available hearing is on September 24th, and there's nothing there now, but a hearing could get scheduled then when it's pretty far out. So that's what we've got.
Yeah, and we don't have to totally like schedule on the fly right here. We could take it to email and try and figure it out. But I guess maybe the question of, would folks prefer we use an existing meeting, or is there flexibility? Again, we'd put a doodle or something together to try and find an off-cycle meeting.
We've done special meetings before. Like I remember a planning commission meeting on a Thursday when I was like my first year that I was on this commission. So I know that we will do things. We will do special meetings, if it's warranted. So I'd be okay with that if that was, it just seems like it would be so impossible to schedule. But if we were able to do so and the members of this body felt that it was, important to do so in the timing that offered to do it as a special meeting instead of a regular meeting, then I find a way to make it work.
Okay. Yeah, I have a feeling that the reality of summer vacations is going to be the real challenge for trying to do something off cycle. So I guess maybe just, and I know Vice Chair Freeman isn't able to be here tonight, but maybe a quick straw poll, like do folks plan on being around on the August 27th? No, that's.
I will not.
You'll not? Okay.
Yeah.
Would you?
Don't know yet.
What's that?
I don't know yet.
You don't know yet? Okay. Okay, so that sounds like a little bit of a question mark. Well, we don't need to solve this here. Let's take it to email. We can try, I think generally we're all think it would be great. We'll move into implementation mode and try and figure out what something could kind of look like. Fantastic. Commissioner Edge, I know your hand is up.
I just had an announcement, I guess. This Saturday is the Oak Grove Festival. So I wanted to encourage everyone who would enjoy doing so to hop on a bike or walk down the trolley trail to the south, just about a mile south of the city limits of Milwaukee, and visit into historic downtown Oak Grove. This will be I don't know what number it is. I feel like this is the fourth time that this has been done. It was rebranded from the Trolley Trail Festival to the Oak Grove Festival. 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. Saturday, June 29th, where the Trolley Trail crosses Oak Grove Boulevard.
Great, thanks so much. Are they gonna have a festival street up and have some of the street closed down? Do you know?
Yes.
Ooh, look at that.
It's very difficult to orchestrate with the county, but yes.
Well, kudos to you and others that have maybe been working on that in front of the scenes or behind the scenes to help make that happen. So that sounds exciting, and I've heard from some other folks that are going to be out there. So I'll look at my calendar and let you know if you can expect me. Any other planning department or planning commission updates? Anything from staff?
I don't think so. We've got our new commissioner joining in July. Joining in July.
At our July.
At the July
5th meeting.
9th?
July 9th. Great.
July 9th. Yep.
Great. And I think Laura and I might be getting together with Lisa later this week.
Mm-hmm.
Look forward to having her introduce herself to all of you at the July 9th meeting. Anything else? Other business updates, or should we move into the forecast for future meetings?
Maybe not.
Forecast for future meetings.
Forecast for future meetings. So on the 9th, we're going to have the Wes building over in the park. They're looking at doing on Millennial on the Bay. They're looking at doing some additions to some of the buildings there. And then we've got another conversation about the Natural Resources Code implementation in a work session. And then I had the CIAC overview tentatively on the work session, but I'm assuming we could move that into this other conversation that
Yeah,
we're
that
having.
sounds
That would
good.
probably be
Yeah,
good, right?
do
Okay.
that.
So I'll go ahead and take that off and move it into the agenda for our other conversation.
Okay.
And just a reminder that, so right now, we don't have anything for July 23rd, so we can probably just take those off your calendars. We'll cancel that tomorrow. And then we're coming back on August 13th for the continuation of the food park.
Great.
Okay? Oh, and the other thing I was going to talk about on August 13th is I want to talk about the annual joint meeting with the NDAs. I'll bring in kind of a draft of a agenda, kind of based on the things that we've done in the past, and we can just use that as a starter. I'm not saying that's what we should do, but it's kind of like, at least we'll have something in writing and we can kind of figure out what it is that we want to talk to the NDAs about. And that is in our, rules governing the planning commissions that we're required to have a yearly meeting with the NDAs, so.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it'd be great. Maybe at that August 13th, we can start talking, like you were saying,
Yeah.
about the agenda a little bit. and
Yeah.
See what folks are thinking.
I will bring that.
Okay, and actually, maybe just a clarifying question on larger schedule. Is July 16th still when city council is going to be considering neighborhood hubs?
July 16th is.
July
that.
16th?
Yes.
Is that? So one thing I actually, on the planning commission updates, so I'll rewind the agenda, that I wanted to just kind of get anyone's perspective on, city council, you might remember, had unanimously advanced the neighborhood hubs work. It made its way to city council, and that was after, I'll rewind the tape even further. That was like after a lot of community engagement by the planning department, probably some of the most robust engagement in planning things more recently. And then that was after our hearing where we actually had community members, a number of community members present, including affected property owners, some of whom, if I'm recalling, chose not to testify here. Well, when neighborhood hubs went to city council, some property owners raised some questions and some concerns that hadn't been previously expressed. And some city councilors were just kind of curious about some specific details of what should be allowed here, what should be allowed there. And ultimately, city council decided to kind of pull it from the agenda and move it forward to July 16th. With the 16th kind of coming up, I wanted to just test whether or not the commission would be interested in writing a short letter to city council, reminding them that we unanimously approved the code package and encouraging them to move forward kind of as is with the package. And I think just kind of along those lines. So I'm happy to put something together, or if someone wanted to volunteer to do that, but wanted to just kind of feel things out if folks are generally okay with that approach.
Yeah, I think that's okay.
And I'm assuming we have minutes from that, so we can see the
We could,
concerns.
yeah, I mean, or from city councils. Yeah, we could. I mean, I think a property owner was trying to decide, did they want to be in, did they not want to be in?
And they've
the
decided, they've
SMU?
made that decision, and
Okay.
so that'll be presented at the hearing. I think the meeting minutes, just to be clear, they won't capture the conversation
Yeah,
that
you'd
was
have to
had.
watch the
If you
hearing.
want to hear really what happened, I think it would be useful to watch.
I mean, I think kind of maybe my own summary, and feel free to like fill in any of the details, is a conversation started about like in SMU or NMU, should certain kinds of offices be allowed or not allowed? Like there was a discussion on that. And then there was also, I think, a discussion around whether or not restaurants or bars would be allowed in certain uses, given the fact that they would then be able to operate until something like 2 o'clock in the morning. Could that create noise issues? And would those noise issues be able to be mitigated? I think as we had talked about it, we felt like, the city, these businesses are licensed by the state. They go through kind of a robust process. The city does have noise ordinance and enforcement capabilities. So I'm not sure kind of where the discussion has been between city council and staff kind of since then. But, I think we at the time felt like those things seemed to be generally addressed.
And I think the other important thing is that there was a lot of conversation about the allowed uses in the NMU zone. And we haven't really touched the NMU zone in quite some time. So there was a lot of conversation about what was allowed and has been allowed for the last 15 years.
Yeah.
And so that was just kind of opening up an entirely new conversation that we hadn't had yet, and wanting to, if we're going to have that conversation, we can have it, but probably not as part of this process if we want this process this project to move forward.
And I think that might actually be the other thing I'd want to see if folks felt comfortable with. We had dabbled at some of that ourselves along the way, and we said, well, what about this in the NMU or that in the MNU? And staff politely kept us at bay and reminded us that was out of scope of the project, but had kind of suggested, well, we could tackle that in the next phase, in a phase 3 of the work. I think there's a question of when a phase 3 would occur. And I guess I would like to include in our letters, just reminding council of our support for the existing code and the policy and the work that's gone into it, and suggest that we move into a phase 3, and we don't waste time on that. We just, city council put it on the work plan, and then staff can kind of figure it out. So that would, I guess, be the other piece of it. And I think some of that is just coming from going through the neighborhood hubs process. And I think a lot of folks were asking similar things about NMU and what's allowed and development and all of those kinds of things. And it just wasn't tackled in the scope of this project because that's how it was scoped. So would folks feel comfortable including something like that as well in the letter? Yeah, seeing heads shaking. Okay, great. Well, I'll draft something and I will circulate it in advance. I was trying to decide whether or not I was going to make that commitment, but I'll circulate it in advance before signing it and sending it out on the before the 16th. And I think that takes us then to the end of our evening. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. We'll get an email out about trying to schedule kind of a planning commission 202 work session, and see y'all later. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.